2 years ago, I made the mistake of trying to rank every episode of Friendship is Magic, and 2 years later, I think I'm finally done. What you're about to watch is my personal list of all 208 episodes of Friendship is Magic ranked from worst to best. That number's a little different from the real episode count because I counted the 8 two-part season premieres and the 7 two-part season finales as one episode each. I also threw in Best Gift Ever and Rainbow Road Trip just for fun. Back when I started, I asked my viewers what their favorite episode was, and the results of that survey are measured in little star counts at the bottom of the screen. I'll also shout out some of the really talented musicians who help provide background music for this video up in the corner. The one you're listening to now is a remix of a song by SpinScissor. With that out of the way, here's a list of every episode of Friendship is Magic ranked. If there was one thing I was dogged on for in last year's podcast episode on Gen 4, it was a 3.5-minute segment where we did nothing but verbally slam Discord into the ground. Looking back on that episode, I think I overreacted. True to form for the God of Chaos, Discord episodes vary wildly in quality. If this line represents the scrub bar of this video, with the worst episodes over here and the best episodes over here, the episodes where Discord plays a plot-significant role in the episode are quite literally all over the place. He's in a few of my favorite episodes, and when the show found a way to properly integrate a character that exists on a larger scale than the rest of the cast, something really special happens. He's also in A Matter of Principles, an episode that manages to highlight all of his worst traits at once, as well as a few of the more dangerous side effects of a show about friendship. I understand Discord is new to the whole friendship thing, and his penchant for mischief gives off big ain't I a stinker energy, but character reveals of the form, see, he really does care, have to be demonstrated to the audience instead of being outright stated to the viewer. You can tell me that he felt left out and that doing his best Steve Buscemi cosplay and turning the school into the Haunted Mansion ride is his way of acting out, but that's at the end of an entire act of ushering in a plague of nonsense for funsies, deliberately sabotaging Starlight's desire to be a fully formed character, victim blaming her for all her actions, and having the audacity to suggest that she has to put up with endangering other students because they're friends. It is a viciously mean-spirited episode that calls upon the worst interpretations of the show's core message, that we have to tolerate those who do wrong to us for any reason. He's also the focus of Three's a Crowd, which is also full to the brim with this kind of disgusting scamp energy. Discord is sick as a dog, so he social engineers a situation where Twilight has to take care of him and try to spend time with Cadence simultaneously. It's a shame because we didn't really get much extended time with Cadence during the show's run, and that would have been fun to see. Instead, they have to take a backseat to Discord's attempts to do something? What are his motivations? You find out later that he was faking being sick the entire episode in an attempt to test his friendship with Twilight, but I have several problems with that revelation, and then I promise we will get back to less petty gripes. 1. Twilight and Cadence have this realization in Act 3 that they actually did get some bonding time in, fighting this cool-looking giant plant monster, but that's in spite of Discord's efforts to the contrary, not because of them. 2. The core plot of the imposing house guest takes an entire act to get going and feels really sluggish. 3. If his cold was fake, what in Celestia's name happened to Rarity and Applejack here? And 4. You got the embodiment of pure chaos sick. Why didn't the storyboarders go crazy with that? A huge part of Discord's appeal are these really dryly delivered sight gags when he talks, so most of the time you have absolutely no idea what's going to happen during his scenes. So go nuts with that! Have him blow his nose with the fabric of space and time, or change the skybox like a TV when he coughs. Instead, all we get are these jet fuel sneezes and this gag where a lamppost tips his hat to him. It just feels like unfulfilled potential in an episode I'm already not crazy about. One of the coolest things about kids these days is that they've come to expect much more emotional maturity out of the programming they watch compared to even 10 or 15 years ago. And that's awesome because it means that we're treating kids more like human beings that will eventually turn into adults and less like koi fish who will devour anything put in front of them. It's also a big part of the reason I watched enough of this pony show to do a multi-hour ranking video on it. So when Secrets and Pies feels like it's setting up for an introduction to the dangers of gaslighting, it's all the more baffling when the show appears to intentionally whiff it. It's not even like the show hasn't done episodes about being deceived by a friend for the greater good, but gaslighting isn't just advanced lying, and I thought the show had the maturity to be able to explain the difference. Gaslighting is a recurring trend of lying or deception to the point where the victim begins to doubt the validity of their own experiences and recollection. It happens frequently in physically and emotionally abusive situations and can lead to lasting trust issues for the victim later in life. In the first act, Pinky's already showing textbook symptoms, starting to reflexively doubt evidence that Dash might have been lying to her. But instead of a series of discoveries leading to a confrontation and an explanation of what it means to do this to someone, Dash doubles and triples down on the gaslight, and most of the remaining episode is spent playing Pinky's paranoia for laughs. It's severely uncomfortable to watch, both emotionally and because of these awkward late SpongeBob gross-up shots shots of Pinky's mental breakdown. It all culminates in this really aimless finale about eating a disgusting giant pie, as if the lack of an appetite was the big thing wrong with this entire episode. It misses the mark hard, and it's one of the only episodes that I consider actively harmful to kids trying to learn actual values from their favorite pony show. A big item on the to-do list for season 9 was to put a bow on a lot of the long-running relationships in the show's history. In a lot of these cases, they did a really good job wrapping things up in a satisfying way, but then they keep wrapping, and then boom, daring doubt. I don't think it's really necessary to retcon the motivations of two primary villains of a side character, especially when both of them originated as broad-stroke fictional characters in Rainbow Dash's favorite book series. It all feels like overkill, especially when we're doing this with a literal truth amulet that forces the wearer to say whatever the writers have decided the truth is for these characters. 204, Father Knows Beast. Some random dragon shows up to mooch off of Spike's need to belong. Of course he's not Spike's real dad, because his character design is awful. Like, I get what they were going for with a desaturated color swap of Spike's colors, but that just makes him look like every legally safe dragon character in a PBS show. It's an interesting concept, but it's trying to wring more character development out of Spike with an angle that was already done way better with the Dragonland trilogy. I'm also embarrassed to admit it, but the first time I watched this episode, I legitimately thought that was Spike's real dad, so joke's on me, I guess. 203, Non-Compete Clause. There's literally nothing I can say about this episode that hasn't already been beaten to death by people who have been in the fandom several times longer than I have. This sort of petty Apple Dash rivalry feels more at home in the first half of the series, and not when they're both teachers at a school together. The whole affair feels like a step backwards. 202, Fluttershy leans in. This is just such a nothing episode. Fluttershy is ready to fulfill her dreams of opening an animal sanctuary, so she hires a bunch of contractors at her friend's recommendation, tells them exactly what she wants, and then they just don't do it. I'm not sure what the lesson is here. Feels kind of like it was a placeholder for something else. There was a time when What About Discord was the worst episode of the series for me. It's still pretty bad, but there are a few little things going for it that show me that there was at least some effort put into this. This idea that everyone should be able to show darker emotions like jealousy and anger and admit to themselves that they feel that way is actually something that I think even some adults need to hear, especially since the episode really nailed the feeling of being left out of a joke that you just had to be there for. This is also the closest the show ever comes to exploring whatever stick-up-his-ass Discord has for Twilight specifically. This sort of passive antagonism was also hinted at in Three's a Crowd, and it would have been really cool to see what kind of a grudge the Lord of Chaos can hold. Let's see, what else? Oh, I love that Discord's flight trail is plaid. This Back to the Future gag was really fun, and I want to meet the Foley artist who had to come into work and record the oddly satisfying sound of hundreds of oranges falling onto a table. Orange! Now that that's out of the way, what is going on with the supporting cast here? All 5 of them seem weirdly offended by Twilight having the audacity to disappear for a weekend and then be concerned that all of her friends are suddenly night and day besties with the reformed villain of the show. I know their attitude toward flaunting an unshared experience was lowballed for the show's child audience, but as an adult watching, they're being enormous jerks, and watching Twilight anxiously try to recreate a lost experience is tough to watch sometimes. There, now I promise you won't hear about Discord for a while. A pretty big fraction of early series episodes suffer from a lot of growing pains that would eventually get polished away as the show found more of an identity. I want anyone watching this to know that as I elaborate here, I'm not trying to put down anybody's first experience with one of their favorite shows, but I am going to use Applebuck season as an example of this kind of roughness. Partway through season 1, the show moved to a more vibrant color palette, but in the initial dozen episodes or so, the saturation values look really washed out and drab by comparison. The other big change involves fixing pacing issues. When Friendship is Magic initially got picked up by the Hub, the intention was to do 2 stories per episode at 11 minutes apiece, similar to a lot of the Cartoon Network shows I grew up with. The production team changed pretty quick to doing 22-minute scripts instead, but it left Applebuck season and its buddy the Ticketmaster in this sort of no man's land in terms of pacing. They brought a second writer in to plump out both episodes, but Applebuck doesn't really get there. It's nobody's fault, just an unfortunate side effect of some early installment weirdness. Let's talk some more about pacing. Pretty early in the writing process, every episode is structured into 3 acts. Part of that is to account for commercial breaks, but it's also a handy tool for storytelling. You've got an act for setup, to set up the cast and the main goal, conflict, where something gets in the way of that, and resolution, where our characters finally do the thing, resolve the conflict, and maybe learn a little bit about themselves in the process. Applejack's Day Off strays from this formula in a pretty jarring way, where instead of following setup, conflict resolution, the episode appears to be conflict resolution and then an application of the lesson she learned back on the farm. I think that optimizing your workflow and cutting out unnecessary steps and processes is really interesting in a vacuum, but it's a weirdly dry topic for an episode of a kid's show. 198, Spike at your service. Spike owes Applejack a life debt after she saves him from a pack of timber wolves, the absolute coolest creature this show has ever had, and it's not even close. This episode seems to want to operate on cringe humor because it's clear that Season 3 Spike has nothing going on. He's flubbing simple farm chores and generally making a nuisance of himself, even though he helped to save an entire empire in the season opener that no one seems to remember. It's trying to paint a competent character that a lot of people care about like a total dunce, and it reeks of this really mean-spirited energy that has never ever sat well with me or the show. This is a show that prides itself on treating its characters with understanding and dignity, and that's just not something on display here. Also, is the Dragon Code a legit thing or not? Because that card was drawn with crayon. 197, She's All Yak. Here's another one of those weirdly mean-spirited episodes, though this one has had 6 extra seasons to properly compose itself into something more coherent. If you can get past the oddly stanky rarity in Act 1, Yona's desire to fit in comes from a really genuine place. It shows a lot of restraint that Yona Sandbar is the closest the Student 6 comes to teasing as shit, because that is some really fertile ground in an environment full of different people just trying to make their way in life. I don't quite blame Rarity for trying to help out, but it's off-putting to suddenly have all these pony traditions that even we didn't know about, and watching a fan-favorite character repeatedly embarrass herself is never fun. But it still manages a really sweet Act 3 scene that manages to successfully park the episode without causing any major collisions, and that's very sweet. 196, A Dog and Pony Show. This one irritates me in a lot of ways I can only describe as nitpicky. Individually, these choices don't bug me, but taken as a whole, it feels like a completely different show at times. I can deal with a one-time only cameo by Sapphire Shores, weird as it is that we frequently mention her during the rest of the series. I can even handle the clumsily broad cartoon Gollum shtick that are the Diamond Dogs, even though it's obvious from fanfiction delivered at the height of the Brony boom that we thought they were going to have a way bigger presence than just one episode. But these really cheesy Spike dream sequences feel really out of place when we're usually just shown Spike going gaga and asked to fill in the blanks ourselves. It feels like time misplaced. Same goes for the wildly bizarre way that Spike gets the rest of the gang to help, and then only on the way there flashes back to Rarity being captured and sending Spike for help. It's needlessly shuffled for almost no reason, and it feels like the show is running off the playbook of a completely different program. 195, Baby Cakes. I love this nervous side glance when Mr. Cake is explaining how they can possibly have Pegasi and unicorn babies. That's the kind of fun setup that sets the tone for a taking care of kids episode. Wind Pinky up on this treadmill and watch her go. Then watch her run out of steam and tire out both herself and the premise. It was close to good though. She pushes away Twilight when she tries to help, and I feel like that would have helped break up the action enough to make for an episode that didn't feel like an unfortunate slog to get through. 194, Just for Sidekicks. Weirdly enough, I can almost handle Spike being a self-serving shirker in this episode. I know that him being dumbed down past the point of failing the Pringles gem test should have driven me up the wall, but I'm gonna call this episode a wash. It's one of the last times we get to indulge in the Spike out of his depth episode type, and one last fluffier episode like this before the show ramps up is okay by me. 193, Uprooted. There's something very sweet about a group of young people exploring how to come together and decide to honor the memory of something as important to the series as the Tree of Harmony. There are these scary, bittersweet undertones where Smolder and the others start having trouble even remembering what the tree looked like, and that adds an air of understated maturity to the episode. Unfortunately, it's one of those episodes where it feels like the ending was conceived first, and the bulk of the episode is a lot of petty, sometimes funny bickering while we kill time until we get there. It's a rough watch, which bums me out because the tree is one of my favorite pieces of mythology this show has. 192, Some Pony to Watch Over Me. Applejack regresses 3 whole seasons to bring you this can of Diet Season 1, where being an overprotective big sister is a personality trait. I'm not usually one for calling out the show when characters begin to float outside what we reasonably expect them to do, but this is egregious even by my standards. It plays out in broad character swaths, and I don't even think the episode calls the Chimera by name. It's too busy trying to connect the dots with some tenuous through line about sisterhood, but it all falls pretty flat for me. 191, The Cart Before the Ponies. Before I begin, I need you to indulge me here for a little bit. I have a bachelor's in math and economics, so I'm absolutely in love with this game I made up called Pause the Kids Show to criticize the math in the background. It's so much fun to catch shows pulling off nonsense in the background, even in the case where we're clearly going for a fun nonsense. We've got a food diagram, unlabeled pie chart, multiplying and dividing random variables and pony symbols, some local minima and maxima, what might be a Markov chain, and according to my friend and Mike a Minkowski space-time light cone. I mean, obviously Cheerilee got her master's in something. Too bad that's the funniest part of the episode for me. The rest is giving the Elder Crusader sisters a chance to polish the idiot ball for most of the episode. Sometimes that can work if you have a particular story you want to tell that needs a little bit of wiggle room, but I'm essentially watching the same story play out 3 times in a row here. There's almost a satisfying symmetry to this episode if it wasn't a repetitive parade of, I want to try making something different this year, but don't you want to win the normal way? Maybe I'll try a few modifications. No sister of mine is gonna win with that nonsense. Rinse and repeat until they arrive at the biggest earworm of the entire series. Stanky cheerleader Cheerilee makes me happy at least. No Second Prances was also one of my most hated episodes for a while, and I think most of that is a consequence of it being incredibly cramped. It's really nice to see Starlight finally making friends, especially when she's still in the extremely tender transition period of integrating her smoothly into the series, which is why I'm baffled that Twilight and Trixie have to have this antagonistic flare-up that blocks out any opportunity to introduce this incredibly sensitive character in an organic way. Aside from Twilight sticking both her hooves all the way in her mouth for the duration of the episode, I'm really truly not upset that character dynamic exists. I'm upset because it took away from time we could have given to a character that desperately needed it. A character that fans at large were already extremely skeptical and at times downright antagonistic toward. It's got just too many things fighting for attention here, and it makes for a really uncomfortable viewing experience. 189, Twilight Time. The Cutie Mark Crusaders play Sorcerer's Apprentice to the newly crowned Princess Twilight Sparkle in one of the weirder pairings in the show's history. It's really bizarre, and their attitude sort of sours the episode. It's a good rule of thumb not to set your expectations too high when a member of the core cast outright states the lesson of the episode and the learner responds with, nah, that ain't it, and proceeds to putz around until the end of the episode. And yet Twilight makes it 7 minutes in before she starts getting suspicious that the girls are name-dropping her for sick grade school clout. It's not a good show for anyone involved, but I really like this line in the diner where Scootaloo basically admits to having resting mare face.
I couldn't help it. When I don't smile in a picture, I look sad.
188, A Flurry of Emotions. I never get tired of the exhausted new parents gag, and Cadence and Shining Armor pull it off so well. Not so much success with stretching out the gag of modern art can be obtuse and weird sometimes, but at least the show tried some humor outside its usual wheelhouse. Back at the A-plot, Twilight gets a turn to succumb to baby fever just like Pinkie did 5 seasons ago. It's less effective here since Twilight should know better than to shirk in her position, but it's very much a case of your mileage may vary when it comes to how much this detail actually impacts your viewing experience. I also appreciate that Grogar makes an early bird cameo 2 seasons early in one of the hospital books, and there's a really cool exercise in animation subtlety when Flurry Heart tries to copy Anti-Twilight's breakdancing bear routine. It's a really fun sequence that I feel gets overlooked a lot. 187, The Ticketmaster. There's nothing here I can add that wasn't already covered by Applebuck season a ways back. It came out in the show's uncertain infancy, so it's padded beyond belief and doesn't really do much beyond preface for the season 1 finale. 186, Owl's Well That Ends Well. I wonder for what percentage of kids their first joke they ever heard was some variation of owls sound like they're asking a question. I'm not out to gatekeep 4-year-olds, but these exchanges grind my brain into dust in a way nothing else does. Otherwise, it's a pretty meh episode. Characters in kids shows are allowed to be petty and vengeful sometimes, but this one hurts to watch because Spike's actions come from a pretty valid need to feel useful and included. That's something I struggle with a lot, so this episode in particular gets right up under my fingernails. 185, Princess Spike. Coming off the heels of the insane 100th episode, Spike stinks at delegating wasn't really an episode I was looking forward to. It also doesn't fully lean into the fun inherent in episodes where the cast has to keep one member of the group from waking up. There's some really interesting character designs and performances though, so that's kinda neat. There are ways to properly introduce a member of your core cast. Dragonshy is not one of them. It's okay to introduce the audience to your favorite pony with broad brush strokes, but this trip up the mountain is pretty tedious from start to finish. It's got stage 4 padding issues and a washed out color palette indicative of early series episodes, and there's not much in the way of gags for the duration. It's very sweet of her to comfort that dragon though.
You're not a bad dragon. You just made a bad decision.
183, Where the Apple Lies. I don't know who decided that we needed an episode about the honest pony learning that lying is bad, but here you go. This episode is all the diabetic hokiness of read it and weep without any of the emotional catharsis attached to it. With Rainbow Dash, it was a lesson about allowing yourself to indulge in interests that might be outside your wheelhouse and not being afraid of that. Here it's about how lying is bad. And I understand that this episode also tries to offer an explanation for Big Mac's man of few words syndrome, but it's not something that I thought was ever owed an explanation. Maybe I'd be more receptive to the character shading if it wasn't stapled onto an otherwise silly, dumb episode. I like Applejack's lankier teen design. Anytime the show tries to pull off new, subtle changes in character model, I find it really impressive. I also like the inclusion of newly engaged, filthy rich, and spoiled milk as plot-significant characters that actually guide the narratives. That was really refreshing. 10 minutes into Over a Barrel, and you might be asking yourself why this is a bottom 30 episode. It gets going right out the gate with a really interesting premise, one of the all-time funniest and most meme-worthy exchanges in the show's history, and introduces a fantastic new stallion who cannot wait to show you his favorite puns. It's got some intense comedic inertia going, which the episode then decides to throw completely away by introducing the buffalo. This is not the fault of the buffalo. Despite being immediately sidelined after this episode, never to be heard from again, they were serviceable, well-to-do characters. What absolutely did not work was the decision to reframe the very real and sensitive history of genocide and theft of land issues between Native Americans and white settlers into a pie fight for the attempt at explaining to kids in the most tone-deaf way imaginable that just sharing was ever a viable solution. Friendship is Magic has touched on certain things since then in an equally on-the-nose way, but I'm gonna draw the line at appropriating one of the darkest events in my country's history just so that one of my favorite shows can feel justified in doing a Wild West episode. It wasn't even necessary to inject real-world genocide into this episode. Just give Brayburn a rival or something and point the conflict there. Not as something I'm trying to talk at minimum about to try to keep this silly pony video from getting any darker than it needs to be. In the back third of the series, the show tried to utilize Celestia as more of a relatable character instead of just a political figurehead. It's an interesting place to mine for new story ideas, and I never thought I'd get to see her prance. It also doesn't work for me. It already puts me off watching someone in a show this genuine be the butt of the joke, let alone the character you're trying to reacquaint viewers with. 180, Frenemies. Isn't it interesting how teamwork is sort of like friendship? I guess that's a neat little cracker of an observation, but aside from moving the season plot forward, this does nothing for me. 179, The Mysterious Mare-do-Well. Dash gets a taste of what it means to be a hero, all the way down to the most cliche trapped in a well danger, and it goes straight to her head. I don't have any problem with the fact that her friends all chose to mess with her instead of having a talk about humility. I guess it goes along with the characteristic dryness of early series Pony, and it's kind of cool for first-time viewers to deduce who's behind it all. If anything, the main conflict hits a wall pretty fast and doesn't really shake it off enough to get going again. 178, Call of the Cutie. Right from the beginning of the cold open, this episode is setting up a ton of long-running concepts that end up being vital to a lot of my favorite character growth episodes. The concept of cutie marks, Apple Bloom's goals, and the head school horse in charge that I was not even aware I needed. Cute Seniora is the best pun ever, and I can immediately understand why Apple Bloom would want to get her hands on that kind of wordplay. Apple Bloom is voiced throughout the series by Michelle Kreber, beginning when she was only 10 years old. One of the most amazing things about binging this show is getting to watch Michelle blossom into a well-rounded voice actress with an amazing singing career. This rite of passage is really important to the longevity of the series, but for now they're just little seedlings and we need time to set those down and let them grow for a bit. It's really interesting to see a character lording the latest trends over your classmates, except that the new purse you bought is actually a metaphor for discovering your life's purpose. At first it seems like they're setting up Diamond Tiara to be Apple Bloom's villain specifically. Thankfully that didn't really pan out, and the show gave her two best friends to help stories bounce around more coherently. And oh my god, tiny cute ponies. They are so stinking cute I want to pick them up and throw them over a house. I don't know what it is, but their heads and bodies are the same size and I cannot stand it. Was it a good decision to make a group of even younger girls in a show already about and for young characters? It was certainly a risk, but given some of the hijinks that this subgroup gets into down the road, I think it was the right call. Friendship is Magic tried out a couple of different styles of humor while it was still grasping for its own identity. To this end, A Bird in the Hoof treats us to not one, but two Benny Hill sequences. I'm all for trying new things, even if it didn't work for me. The main thing I remember about watching this episode for the first time is my wife knowing what was about to happen to Philomena in Act 3 and just waiting there patiently for me to react. She didn't really get what she was hoping for. The flames go up and I'm just, oh, so it's a phoenix. Not today, wife. You're gonna have to wake up pretty early to fool someone who fell for Spike's fake dad. 176, 246, great. The show throws Rainbow Dash wildly out of her element and asks her to cope by completely ignoring her element. Aside from cute cheerleading shenanigans and the show completely failing the include a cheerleader character without a Valley Girl accent challenge, this episode is really only known for two things. One of them is Rainbow Dash being a total brat about her responsibilities. The other is Smolder putting her on an absolutely savage verbal beatdown that rivals even the 3-minute Discord dunkfest from the finale. The two of them set up and pay off a weird kind of catharsis that some people really wanted and others found really mean-spirited. So I want to pose a question to you using these two camps of fan reactions. When a character begins to do something you don't like, does your anger rest with the character or the writers? Some fans may watch Dash act the way she does and use it to support their biases that she's a terrible character now. Another camp might be upset with the writing staff for making Dash out to be this kind of pony that they truly feel she isn't. So what gives? When a character changes, is the group of characteristics that we're familiar with that make up what it means to be a Rarity or a Fluttershy or a Rainbow Dash changing? Or have they become a character different from the one you're familiar with and slipped, for better or worse, out of character? It's a really cool thought experiment, but not one I have time to pause a 3-hour video to tackle. Chew on it a while and let me know in the comments. Can you believe that people back in the day were upset because they thought that feeling Pinky Keen was trying to be anti-science or preach religion in their pony show? That's one of a dozen fascinating weird controversies I got to read up on as somebody who only recently joined the fandom. I find that kind of silly. The Science vs. Superstition episode has been on TV since before my parents can remember. It's never gonna set ratings records, but it's usually a fun little fluff episode that allows you to get to know your characters better. Asking someone if they're superstitious is practically a first date question. And halfway into the first season, we're still in that tenuous territory where I don't know who these characters are, or why the color palette is still washed out, or why this gator thing is my new favorite character. But that's what these kinds of episodes were designed to help me fill in. This episode is also notable for letting Spike have a one-episode catchphrase, and I'm glad they ditched it, because holy guacamole is for real a D-tier catchphrase.
Holy guacamole!
174, The Last Crusade. I have tried as hard as I can to be objective about this situation over the last 2 years, but I am still coming to the same conclusion. I hate Scootaloo's parents. Not treading any new ground there, but man, you show up with little to no warning and try to take away the fan favorite Small Bean under the guise of being her parents, despite her already being under the loving, capable care of the 2 best lesbian aunts I know. And don't try to tell me it was worth it to see that heartfelt thank you from the town, because I was already on board in that department. 173, The Beginning of the End. This whole season had an entire laundry list of things it had to do to wrap up such a popular show in a satisfying way, and I don't think establishing a coherent season premiere was one of them. It's important to set up that Celestia and Luna are about to retire, but thrusting things on Twilight so suddenly felt like bending the order of events for the purpose of having something to call a season premiere. Grogar looks amazing, no surprises there, but the last big thing I want to tackle about this big farewell scene with Discord is going to take some more explanation. Tell you what, hang around here for another hour or two, and when we get to the series finale, I'll talk about it then. Good? Great. Let's speed things up a bit. 172, Yakety Sax. Pinky is in love with a new instrument that she is terrible at playing. Through some soul searching and a trip to see the masters, she relearns the meaning of putting passion before skill. It's a neat little episode, even if the lesson hits a few guardrails on the way to the pocket. 171, For Whom the Sweetie Bell Tolls. How do Luna fans feel about this episode compared to the other Nightmare Inspector episodes? Bloom and Gloom and Sleepless in Ponyville have their own moments, but this one fell a little flat for me. The horror elements are there, but I kind of feel like this faux Christmas Carol episode could have been done with a cast of people instead of ponies without changing much. 170, Castle Sweet Castle. The main 6 stink at interior decorating. The song is pretty nice, and I can identify with feeling alone and unattached in a new place, but I feel like the entire episode is outshone by bulk biceps working at the tanning salon. Number 169, Sweet and...
Baby dragon hatching season?
Sweet and Smoky. Fluttershy is tagging along this time to help bring the Garble trilogy to a proper conclusion. I love Bongo Shy more than life itself, and it's nice to see that they bothered to wrap up Garble's character arc at all, but this episode structure tied a pretty loose knot comparing the Be Yourself arc with this bit about getting the dragon eggs to hatch. Could have been worse. 168, Party Pooped. I sure am glad Pinkie Pie is here to satisfy this extremely needy new race of character we've introduced, because the Yaks being dissatisfied is a joke that gets old fast. The lesson appears to come out of nowhere, and I'm really glad Pinkie found a doctor to help with her back after carrying this entire episode. 167, A Trivial Pursuit. If you can get over this weird temporary backslide in Twilight's character when she should be setting up to be the new ruler of Equestria, this one's actually pretty serviceable. I did 4 years of Quiz Bowl in high school, so I happened to actually run into people who took the game this seriously. Twilight's a fun person, she's just not a fun person to be around. 166, 28 Pranks Later. Oh hey, another one of those episodes where someone states the moral in Act 1 and now we have to pad it out until it's time for them to finally get it. Dash wakes up on the out of the bed and everyone's had enough that they're willing to fake a kid-friendly zombie apocalypse. Some fans call this overkill, but come on, they interrupted Gummy's 9 a.m. closet time. That is unforgivable. What carries a lot of this episode for me is just how unapologetically dark it is. No kid show qualifier here. Parts of this episode legitimately scare me, and that's even before you get a good look at the zombie babies. Thank goodness for these out-of-character spa scenes, because I'm old enough now that I can say with absolute certainty that I don't ever want to see a school newspaper episode again. There's nothing wrong with Ponyville Confidential potential doing a pony version of this story because I'm always going to love tiny cute ponies. But it takes the edge off when I've already seen a version of this episode in so many other kids shows. 164, Family Appreciation Day. I really truly did not think that My Little Pony had a Weekend at Bernie's gag in them. Just wanted to get that out of the way. For being the youngest member of a family known throughout Equestria for its undying love and devotion to one another, it's weird seeing Applebloom so embarrassed by her exaggeratedly senile grandmare, almost to the point that it's uncomfortable to watch. They managed to stick the landing with this cool overexposed film stock retelling of Granny's past when she first came to Ponyville, and that was genuinely sweet. I also love the entire concept that is Zap Apples. No joke, if this show came out in 2000 instead of 2010, I would be absolutely furious that Zap Apples aren't a real fruit that I can go get at the fair. 163, Going to Seed. I've come a long way towards actually appreciating what this episode is. Maybe I got mad that they were making poor Big Mac do all the chores himself, but I like that this episode puts its own little clever pony spin on Santa isn't real. They cap it off with a fun little twist that I never saw coming, and there's even a really sweet treehouse scene between the sisters, and you don't get a lot of that, especially this late in the series. Check out this match cut to morning after the sisterly bonding. That's nice. 162, The Crystal Empire. Twilight and Celestia both mention moving on to the next phase of her training, and we all know now that they're talking about Twilacorn, but from the perspective of a fresh viewer, this seems kind of nebulous and unfocused. I also get that Hasbro is a toy brand first and foremost, but what are crystal ponies? I'm sure that some video out there could bring me back up to speed on the lore since I'm a little rusty, but I found this weird blend of physical horse and crystal creature really off-putting. While Twilight works out what she's supposed to be doing next, the rest of the main six are played really flat, taking time to check really routine character boxes while we wait for Sombra to show up. Speaking of which, Sombra is the coolest thing since Evil Sliced Bread, and I've always maintained that he works better as an idea than as a person, as this sort of shapeless manifestation of evil. He's easily the best part of this episode around this weird self-imposed challenge of Spike not being able to help carry the crystal heart away from danger. What? Twilight takes this idea of being able to handle things herself way too literally, and it just doesn't scan. When your most memorable scene becomes a meme, something's off. When I watch the show for the first time, sometimes I text Haley some of my gut reactions. One time she casually asked me, "Have you got to bats yet?" Looking back on it, it is wild that this episode sparked the huge popularity of bat ponies. With how many of them I was seeing all the time, I thought they'd at least be their own race in the show or something, or at least show up in more than one episode outside of a couple cameos. I'm not mad, I'm just fascinated. Fluttershy and Applejack have this little sing-song feud about what to do about some bats that have set up home in Sweet Apple Acres. And of course, one of the only times we use the stare for plot purposes, it backfires and turns Best Girl into Best Girl of the Night, and we gotta fix that. It's a fun, spooky episode, but if you have to incorporate a magical whiteboard to explain the plot of your kid's show, maybe you should take another script pass. 160, A Friend Indeed. Pinkie Pie the Unstoppable Force meets Cranky Doodle Donkey the Immovable Object. Unable to fathom how anyone could possibly not want to be her friend, Pinkie resorts to a series of borderline irritating Looney Tunes gags to try to win his friendship. What Pinkie has to learn is that friendship isn't always a hug and a smile. Sometimes it's an oddly sweet, overexposed film reel about a long-lost love reunited. I like the Yankee Doodle motif around Cranky, and this episode earns extra points for actually introducing you to Matilda earlier in all the commotion. On account of the thing.
My name is Pinkie Pie, and I am here to say I'm gonna make you smile, and I will brighten up your day.
Do you think Daniel Ingram and the music team knew just what they were about to unleash upon the world when they wrote this song? This upbeat sugar rush earworm of a tune? This frontrunner for not just the best character song in My Little Pony, but quite possibly the best character introduction song in all of fiction? This was my first pony music video back in 2013, way before I even considered watching the show on my own, and it's a locked pick on every road trip mix I make from here to the end of time. 159, A Horseshoein'. Starlight and her potted plant pet, Phyllis the Philodendron, need to appoint a vice head mayor to help run the school, so she assembles a literally colorful group of candidates to help interview for the job. And Trixie's here too to help lean so hard into the nepotastic skid that it feels at times like I'm missing a joke. This one's got some of the similar irritated catharsis to 246 Great, where we get to see Starlight lay into Trixie by the end of it, but this episode is saved from going off the deep end by Twilight and a little bit of Devil's Advocate. Assuming that you'll be given a job based on connections rather than qualifications is an awful stunt to pull, but it's also on Starlight here for turning a blind eye as long as she did. It's an Aesop on the maturity of knowing your limits, as every other candidate for the job realizes they're not cut out for this line of work. And it helps even out this episode, especially if you may not be the biggest Trixie fan. 158, marks for effort. One of the cooler things that Season 8 tried in their big ol' buffet of new ideas was this concept of a backdoor villain. I'd really like to know how this twist fared when it aired, because this is a really out there ambitious reveal structure for a show catered to a young audience. We'll get into how well it paid off in Cozy Glow's other important episodes, but I can't get over the idea that the show would even attempt something like this. Does it work? I don't know, but something's clearly up from the moment you meet her. The show is totally within their own MO to write a sickly sweet character like this, but an adult watching has seen the deceptively sweet Shirley Temple cover up enough to feel like the show is almost doing a bit. Like at the end of her episode, Cozy's just gonna jump out of her skin and morph into something horrific. It creates this weird sense of unease that I guess you could say they were going for, but some viewers might feel off-put by what feels like a missed joke. I was so bummed to find out people don't like PPOV because I absolutely adore the Rashomon. You've definitely seen a TV show try this before, even if you're not aware that it comes from the 1950 Kurosawa film Rashomon, where 4 people recount their subjective, biased versions of how a samurai was murdered in the forest. The cool thing about this technique in less dramatic shows is that on top of not ever getting the full picture of events, you also get a really fun Neapolitan sandwich of every character trying to tell their own unique flavor of the truth. That's some of what we get here, but I want to know specifically for Pony fans, why didn't this episode work? Haley and I had a huge argument about this, but we think it boils down to a lack of artistic freedom. A lot of the differences in how these stories were told is in how hyperbolic we can portray these characters. From talking like a sailor for some reason to literal showboating. Sure, those are differences, but they're rather pointed and restrained. Go crazy with this idea. Maybe Applejack can get some epic adventure music, or Pinky can tell her side like it was a game show. The show has constructed all kinds of vibrant, colorful characters, and letting them run loose in an episode where by design things aren't supposed to match up could have made for an amazing episode. Here though, it just feels like a muffled, missed opportunity. When should a show try new things? It's an interesting question, because if you change too much, you risk alienating your core audience. But if you don't evolve, you get equally loud cries of the show becoming stale and predictable. It's such a difficult balancing act, and one that is never going to satisfy everyone. It's hard to accept change, especially when it comes to something you love. There's a lot of stuff screaming for your attention in the Season 8 premiere, and while I don't much care for the adaptation of the core cast into the positions of teachers at a brand new school with less than 10 minutes of prep time, or the framework of a place that kids spend most of their time and therefore can relate to, or the bigoted one-note "I don't care that you're voiced by Maurice LaMarche Chancellor" looking down his nose at everyone, I think the thing School Days wants to remind us of is the fact that it's okay for characters to run their course. By this point, the show had been going on for over 160 episodes. That's a lot of time, and even for a setting as large as Ponyville, it's okay if you start running out of things to do with these characters. I'm not advocating to completely throw away Rarity or Pinky or any of the ponies you've grown attached to, but I think it's more than okay to put the primary cast on the back burner to cool off for a while. Equestria is massive, and this wonderful show has introduced so many different possibilities to us. I just thank my lucky stars that the Student 6 work out as well as they do. The biggest plus for this new amalgamation of more diverse, more immature characters is that, by all means, they could have just been carbon copies of the main 6. Sure, we still have characters that are shy, or excitable, or hot-tempered, but those are more mixed than matched here, and it's those traits that help color these kids in different combinations than we've ever seen before. They're so effortlessly charming that they end up feeling like natural extensions of the show's character set, instead of a gang of scrappies sent to extend the life of a show. And that goes a long way to helping the show stretch its legs this far in. Here's a fun fact. When the team was initially writing Swarm of the Century, writer M.A. Larson thought they were doing the pony version of Gremlins, while Lauren Faust was under the impression that this episode was an allusion to the Tribbles from Star Trek. I can see it either way. There's plenty of chaos to contain here that allows for some fun pony mayhem and this weirdly early series Aquaman magic. It's fine. The episode's fine. 154, Celestial Advice. The only season premiere in the entire series to fit into one episode slot. Discord bullies Twilight into being worried about Starlight's future. I'm okay with that direction because Twilight and Celestia work really well as foils. It's a shame then that this episode drags as much as it does. It's padded front to back with imaginary situations and a weak act break of Celestia laughing. I get what they were going for though, and I still prefer it over a bloated 2-episode arc. 153, Hearthbreakers. My 2 favorite Earth ponies share their first hearthwarming eve together as a connected family and learn about the frustrating impenetrability of traditions and the cohesion into new ones. This one can veer at times into unpleasant territory as Applejack puts her hoof in her mouth over and over again, but it's it's got a sweet ending that more than justifies the tears of all the fans who know that Big Mac and Marble Pie will never be together. 152, Look Before You Sleep. The first of many episodes to play up the opposites attract dynamic between Rarity and Applejack. I'll be honest, none of the jokes here are gonna set the world on fire, but it's beyond cute watching Bookworm Twilight Sparkle so excited for her first sleepover. 151, Friendship is Magic. A good pilot should do a couple things correctly. It should tell you what the show is about, give you a broad stroke idea of the main characters, and get you interested enough to want to know what the characters might get into next. Friendship is Magic, the pilot, not the show, does exactly that and basically nothing else. This isn't a dig against the pilot, it's just impressive how bog standard this first episode is in terms of impressions. Here's Twilight Sparkle. She's very studious and aloof. Here are her 5 horse friends. There's not a lot more to say about it. It's a pretty efficient, if underwhelming pilot. 150, Ghostbusters. There's an interesting hint in this episode about Twilight being afraid of being the center of attention, to the point that she repeatedly refuses to intervene in a scuffle between her friends and my favorite snarky wonder child. It's so interesting to me because this introverted trepidation never comes up again, and it hinted at some really nuanced character shading for Twilight that we unfortunately didn't get to see much of after this. Part of it is because fans are still to this day wrestling with the living paradox that is the great and powerful Trixie. Voiced by intensely talented character actress Kathleen Barr, who also helms Chrysalis and that blue-haired canker sister, Trixie is equal parts precocious scamp and irritating showboat in this cocktail that weirdly never gets old. Unlike the parts of me that want to punt Discord through a mountain, I always come back for Trixie, and I think a lot of that is because of how well she's integrated herself into the main cast. She's a great partner when Starlight enters the picture, and she's got a pair of really flashy villain episodes while the show is still finding its footing. I also adore the absolutely absurd contradiction of being a stage magician in a world where real magic exists, and also you're a unicorn so you can do all that magic. I guess showmanship counts for a lot. I'm going to mostly ignore Rarity here since I feel very whatever about the Wax Wings arc and instead focus on what I know people all came for when they read the title of this episode. Along with Zap Apples and Winter Wrap-Up, the Sonic Rainboom is by far one of the coolest concepts made up for the My Little Pony universe. It combines something objectively appealing to its target demographic, a rainbow, and adds speed and power and weirdly scientific rigor to create this awesome urban legend eluding Dash for most of the episode. This is the kind of world building that made me fall in love with this show, and the fact that this concept has this sort of cosmic significance to the plot of the show in a much better episode later on gives me chills every time I think about it. 148, Forever Philly. Rarity feels her relationship with her baby sister slipping away and learns that growing up doesn't always mean growing apart. It's a little middling having to wait for the B plot with Zipperwhale's dog to catch up so we can have this neat parallel with Sweetie Belle and Rarity, but it's cute. I'm also a huge fan of this line where Sweetie Belle talks about having more mature tastes because it catches me off guard every time I watch it.
What's the matter, darling? I guess I just prefer black box experimental feeder.
It's been about, what, half an hour since we did a Discord episode? Then we may as well take a second to get one of the more controversial episodes out of the way. 4 days after Discord's premiere and the return of Harmony, the production team submitted to Hasbro for approval an episode called Keep Calm and Flutter On. Coming down in the tail half of the truncated 3rd season, John Delancey returns to portray the reformation of his character. This time around, everyone is understandably skeptical, but the standout performance here goes to Andrea Libman, who plays a conflicted yet resolute friend to the character who arguably needed it the most. Well, actually, needed? This episode parks itself right on top of one of the biggest thematic thorns the show has repeatedly had to deal with: reformation. When Celestia drops Discord off, she preempts all discussion by letting the girls in on a little secret.
But I have use for Discord's magic if it can be reformed to serve good instead of evil.
The biggest problem with a setup like that is that it presupposes that Discord will be reformed, as in the girls have no choice in the matter. This is now a matter of how, not whether, to assimilate him. This bears a disturbingly similar problem to lower profile episodes like Secrets and Pies, where the assumptions stray a little too close to emotionally manipulative real-world problems like gaslighting and emotional abuse. I'll give it to Fluttershy. She, among all others, really wanted Discord to change, to the point where she refused to stop the chaos he was causing out of the goodness of her heart. It's a gut-wrenching scene, but its existence belies a more serious problem with the show's ideas that's definitely going to come up later in this list. 146, Every Little Thing She Does. Starlight misses the forest for the trees when she's assigned to bond with Twilight's other friends. This is one of those episodes at a convenient cherry-picking height whenever someone wants to point out Starlight being a terrible character. I would know, I used to be one of those people. And while I do have a bit of a hard time justifying non-consensual perpetual mind control, and an even harder time convincing myself that a character powerful enough to run a town-sized cult would have trouble understanding the alien concepts of empathy and personal relationships. It's actually an okay episode if you don't take it too incredibly seriously. For one, it's funny as hell. These no-thoughts, head-empty versions of the main six lead to some absurd Sims-style mayhem that the show doesn't get to dabble in. From Applejack recounting every novel ever made and Pinky feeding an entire army, to Rarity Bedelia and Fear Factor Fluttershy, there's plenty of gags here to distract you from the moral iffiness of this plot. Like this scene. After they put the spiderweb back up, did Fluttershy wink at her? I also like this cool audio trick where Starlight's voice echoes through an empty chamber with a long audio decay that gets chopped off when we cut to a medium shot of her.
Whew. Okay, Starlight, you've got this. A handful of friendship lessons is nothing compared to the spells you've mastered.
Cool stuff. 145, Fall Weather Friends. Oh hey, Appledash! A wonderful start to one of the most enduring friendships of the series and the launcher of 1,000 ships. This one's got this cool Hanna-Barbera quality with its gags, and it keeps the pace going from start to finish. Haley's not the biggest fan of Pinky's colored commentary.
Yes, and grudge rhymes with fudge.
But it keeps the energy up and does a great job setting the tone of the series going forward. On the other side of the coin, Rarity and Dash have to remind themselves that friendship takes maintenance, and while the end in Friend is full of some out-of-character pettiness from both of them, you do get some cute, much-needed bonding in between two characters that the show admits don't often share that much screen time. 143, Power Ponies. The gang gets sucked inside a magic comic book because whatever, right? It's mainly an excuse to get into some superhero shenanigans with no strings attached. The finished version of this episode had 10 extra minutes cut from its first draft, and that might be for the best. Someone in the writing team must have thought that Saddle Rager payoff was really funny. 142, Winter Wrap-Up. Maybe this episode's a little safe and more than a little dry in the middle, but it's a fan favorite for a reason. Even leaving alone the absolute banger tune that is the title track, not a lot of kids shows get that kind of expanded scope in their world building, and it did nothing but good for the show. It was the first time I really felt that Equestria could be a real lived-in world instead of some nebulous world meant to sell toys. It's like the show's reverse Shark Jump. 141, Bloom and Gloom. Apple Bloom completes the trilogy of the Cutie Mark Crusaders, being visited by everyone's favorite nightmare princess to discuss her anxieties about the future. This was one of the cooler through lines in the Crusaders' journey as characters, encountering a mentor figure in a time of need. Sleepless in Ponyville touched on some serious childhood anxieties, and Sweetie Belle's episode has its moments, but I'm kinda glad the structure was retired after this one, especially because Season 5 begins a different kind of character arc for the girls that needed some run-up space. Oh hey, Discord's back! Oh hey, Discord's back. Make new friends, but keep Discord sees the god of chaos trying to grasp the fact that friendships don't have to be monogamous. He goes about this in the worst way possible, but his heart's in the right place. I love that Treehugger strikes this perfect balance between being a character that Fluttershy would genuinely be friends with, while at the same time being the perfect character to get under Discord's skin, even if the hippie joke does get pretty old near the end. It's got more of that 246 great catharsis where someone actually gets to tell him off, but at least it's a friendship lesson successfully delivered instead of just quipped around until it gets returned to sender. Season 4 had this really cool through line where in the season premiere the girls discover this locked box with 6 keyholes, and when they can't get it open they kind of set it aside. But before we can get to one of the coolest things the show's ever done, each of the girls has to have their key episode. Some problem that tests their adherence to their element of harmony in a way that maybe is harder or more complex for them to grab at first glance. Most of these key episodes are fantastic, or at least really good, and it says a lot that the worst of the bunch is 416, It Ain't Easy being Breezies. Fluttershy cares for a swarm of Breezies that have become stranded during their migration, and she learns that the kindest thing she can do for them is kick them out of her cottage. It's really awesome that Fluttershy references the Breezies 5 episodes earlier when she leaves to study them in Three's a Crowd, but I wasn't expecting them to sound so Germanic. It's a really interesting choice, but there's a very odd dissonance between what I'm seeing and who I'm hearing that bugs me. They visit the Breezies' homeworld in a brief scene that feels like it exists just to sell toys, but otherwise it's pretty unmemorable. 138, May the best pet win. Rainbow Dash holds a contest to see who's most suited to being her new pet, and I can tell you right now it's not going to be the duck they animated on the wrong layer, that's for sure. Andrea Libman and Ashley Ball knock it out of the park with this really fun sung-through song about all the different pet possibilities, and the plot starts off on such a high note. Then it gets brought down slightly by Rainbow Dash not quite understanding the purpose of a pet. Whatever, I can ignore that. Mainly because this episode keeps itself afloat with animal gags and sets up a fantastic later episode by introducing us to the second best reptile in the series, so look forward to that. 137, Triple Threat. Spike has to keep his friends Thorax and Ember from meeting because he thinks that their personalities will clash so hard it'll cause a literal war. If it weren't for Thorax and his effervescent precious bean energy, this would be the absolute perfect 5 out of 10 episode. Nothing at all offensive or memorable about it. This took 2 dates to the prom plot is pretty forced and by the numbers, but Thorax and Ember are both cool enough on their own to carry this one. 136, Not Asking for Trouble. Pinky's gotta convince Prince Rutherford that it's okay to ask for help after an avalanche engulfs their village. Man, in the 2 years since we last saw the Yags, it's clear that someone did some serious workshopping on these characters because they are way funnier than they were in Season 5.
Pink Pony better check self before wreck self.
The episode's still pretty flat, and I'm not sure why Gummy's here, but I'm not going to complain about the real ambassador standing by to audit this episode. 135, Apple Family Reunion. Applejack learns that family is about spending time together, not whipping up arbitrary games for the kids and trying to speedrun a quilt. For whatever reason, as someone who loves games more than life itself, I have a really petty bone to pick with this episode because of that. But I have to remember that she's not the party planning pony for a reason. It's also one of the stronger emotional cores to an episode and does what a lot of great episodes do, playing to character strengths. Also, can I talk about Raise This Barn for a second? Raise This Barn is an unapologetically Western number that doesn't hedge its bets and go for more of a pop country fusion, and that's dedication there. The whole Apple family tree gets together to reconstruct the barn, and no one gets played for cheap shot stereotypes, and that's really cool and wholesome. 134, Spice Up Your Life. Pinky and Rarity try to save a failing family-run Indian restaurant from Anton Ego. Lots of things to unpack here. I find it really novel that since it's the first time they had to use the cutie map in a while, they have this whole scene where they try to troubleshoot the map into launching properly. That was fun. Also, this father-daughter. I love them. Saffron Masala is so pretty. I adore her design and how they leaned into Indian influences with her. She's voiced by Diana Karina, who also voiced Arya Blaze, the buttercup of the Dazzlings from Rainbow Rocks. Her father, Coriander Cumin, is voiced by Lee Tokar, voice of Snips, Stephen Magnet, and Gummy's inner monologue. I like that they managed to stuff a believable middle-aged dad character into this pony show that actually services the emotional center of the episode. They're having trouble attracting the attention of Zesty Gourmand, every stuffy food critic you've ever seen. And since writing this entry, I had a tikka masala for the first time, and oh my god, how do you not have every pony in there? That is incredible. So the girls go about bringing in customers in their own way, and that sort of breaks down when, instead of other Cutie Map episodes where both girls realize they were only half right in their approach and they come together to work out a solution, Pinky convinces Rarity that she was right all along and that being true to your style was always the best policy. There's a repetitive song about fixing the problem, but I want to give a shout out to musician Caleb Chan, who played the variety of authentic musical instruments for this song, including the tablas, dolak, bansuri, and finger cymbals, which sounds so much fun to play. 133, Once Upon a Zeppelin. Twilight's parents win a Luigi's Mansion contest and have to deal with the stipulations of a maniacal tour guide played by the most surprising return villain of the entire series. They just want to enjoy time with their kids, and if that means awkwardly obliged time away from their daughter, they try to manage in the best way they can. This episode always felt like a less mean Fame and Misfortune, mainly due to the character worship being grounded in something more substantial than a magic meta book. They do manage to pull out a sweet ending, and Iron Will's actually pretty funny the second time. 132, Parental Guidance. A lot of people seem to dislike this episode because it seems to glorify agreeing with your parents under any circumstances because other kids have it worse, and I can see where this moral might chafe a bit against fans with a history of abuse in the home, but I think that you have to try and look at this episode in context and appreciate Dash for eventually coming to a measured conclusion by the end about her adorable helicopter parents. It's super cute getting to see Scoot geek out about her childhood hero, and getting to meet a set of main 6 parents is always a treat. Honestly, if you want something to be upset by, I found Scootaloo turning against Dash for yelling at her parents one time a little wonky, but we get to explore more about Scootaloo's quasi-orphan status, and Dash showing this much humility warms my heart. Hey guys, did you know that reading is for everyone? Read It and Weep is unapologetically the most schmaltzy Saturday morning cartoon episode you could have possibly hoped for. Dash injures a wing and is forced to come to terms with the fact that she enjoys reading. Oh my god! Just an aside, I do want to point out that there are actual groups like Operation Paperback who do this, working to give books to injured soldiers overseas, so it's not like they manufactured this setup out of nowhere. I'm being silly, but this kind of pro-reading message seems so charmingly old school to me. I mean, it's cool to see Dash learn that it's okay to be a three-dimensional character, but there's a reason you hear shows do jokes about how you can find more at your local library. I want to make it really clear that I like this episode because of its corniness, not in spite of it. It introduced the Daring Do pentology and got Dash to be cute, so that's a win in my book. 130, the parent map. Starlight and Sunburst come together to learn how to interact with their parents as adults. I really like that I thought this episode was going to go the way of tell your parents to back off, when in reality the compromise lands somewhere closer to realizing that your parents just want to be a part of your life. Whether it's mom helping you find a career path, or dad just wanting to spend time with you like the good old days when you were still an edgy teenager holed up in your room that suspiciously had no kites in it. Maybe she wasn't in that phase yet. There's also this theme of progress versus stasis going on that's one of the more subtle ones the show has ever done. Before we even get to the bits with the career-oriented mom and the smothering dad, there's this conflict about how to make something you love the strongest it can be. Firelight wants everything roped off and preserved past the point of being useful for the citizens of Hope Hollow, while Stellar Flare wants to borderline gentrify the town by adding all sorts of amenities that no one was really asking for. In that way, it's a really thematically strong episode on top of being really funny. I'm starting to regret putting it at 130, but this list has been locked for weeks, so on we go. At the beginning of this video, I talked briefly about a survey I put out to the entire Brony fandom. In the first 2 months of 2022, I invited everyone who walked within earshot to take an anonymous one-question survey that asked, what is your favorite episode of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic? These survey results didn't impact my rankings at all, but I did allow respondents to explain their choice if they wanted. One fan wanted me to know, I like the one where Pinkie goes crazy, hee hee hee. And while generously they may have been talking about Too Many Pinkie Pies or the one where Pinkie Pie knows, I'm almost certain the episode they had in mind was Party of One. No one wants to come to Pinkie's frankly excessive parties because they're too busy planning one for her birthday. This causes one of those wacky mental breakdowns that maybe hasn't aged great and causes one of the most infamously poorly written fanfics that I definitely didn't read in the parking lot of a Taco John's. Problems aside, it's a fine time and the meme game is pretty good too. 128, Between Dark and Dawn. Celestia and Luna deal with the stresses of being retired and unsure what to do with themselves. The sisterly bonding from underdeveloped characters is a really welcome change of pace, and that song is really good too. Even if the B-plot around the royal swanifying tanks like a lead Pegasus. And can we get more of these rad monster fights with giant turtles? They're few and far between, and I'm always pleasantly surprised when they show up. 127, Rock Solid Friendship. In order to keep an episode about pressuring your sister to move to town with you afloat, Pinkie mugs her way through a series of increasingly pushy tactics, culminating in a man-made cave-in revealing another possible playset. It's not all bad, considering this episode has the single funniest joke in the entire series. It's also nice when two characters bond that you wouldn't have imagined having a ton in common. Kites don't judge you for being different, but some people are apparently off-put by Starlight's sudden obsession with flying kites, down to using real-life terms about the minutia. Why is she suddenly obsessed with flying kites for no reason? I hear my wife and others ask incredulously. But guys, a lot of you were the ones complaining that she felt like a self-insert fan character because she lacked any interests or defining features. And now that she cares about something personal, you want to dunk on her for it? What did you want? An entire episode dedicated to her entering a kite flying competition and realizing that hobbies can be expensive, so be careful.
I really like kites. They're starting to grow on me.
In 2015, Friendship is Magic released the Season 5 episode Brotherhooves Social. Chronologically, this episode occurs simultaneously with the previous episode Made in Manhattan, which sees Rarity and Applejack tied up elsewhere solving an unrelated friendship problem. With her sister preoccupied, Applebloom is upset that she and Applejack won't be able to participate in the annual bonding competition, the Sisterhood Social. Unbeknownst to her, Big Mac has been dealing with feelings of being unwanted, recalling times when they were younger and Applebloom used to be completely in awe of everything her big brother did. Seeing a way to bond with his little sister again, and completely of his own accord, Big Mac surprises Applebloom the next day by appearing at the event dressed as a mare, claiming to be Applebloom's long-lost cousin Orchard Blossom. What occupies most of the rest of the episode is a series of comedic scenes in which Applebloom and Big Mac attempt to win events at the social, with Big Mac trying his best to hide the fact that Orchard Blossom is a fictional character that he fabricated in order to attend the event. Because I only began regularly watching My Little Pony in the summer of 2020, all I have to go on in terms of fan reactions at the time is word of mouth and a handful of abandoned blog posts and Tumblr pages. But from what I can gather, a non-negligible portion of the fan base expressed distaste for this episode, with many claiming that it made fun of the trans and gender non-conforming community as a whole. There are records of fans claiming that they would no longer watch the show, and Peter New, voice actor for Big Mac, wrote an unsolicited apology for the episode in a post to his personal Facebook that can still be read today. Before I provide my 2 cents on the situation, I realize I'm a cis male, and I'm willing to admit that there are topics about which I'm deeply unqualified to pick apart, so I invited several of my mutual trans friends on Twitter to comment on the situation themselves. Eryn Erikard is a trans artist and provided some context. I honestly don't find the episode to be that offensive. I think that was right around the time that I came out as trans, and even then it didn't feel like it was trying to be mean. I'd say it's no more offensive than Mrs. Doubtfire, which is uncomfortable, but from what I can remember isn't a bad faith representation. Some may take issue, some may not, and I get it either way. My personal take was in a positive light, especially since I had just come out and my younger sister was my most supportive anchor at the time, so it was personal. HoovesAreBetter, who was also kind enough to proofread this section for me, provided a different perspective. I do remember a lot of friends being concerned, wondering how I and other trans fans would feel about it. I know some fellow trans fans were uncomfortable with the episode, and I'm not going to tell them that their feelings were wrong at all. At no point does Granny say being a mare is a requirement. It's who you are and the bond you represent. If anything, I'd say the failing in the episode is that it covers the topic of gender diversity through the lens of somebody who is cis. Had it been written by someone trans, or at least someone who knows someone trans, it may have been more sensitively written. It was an accepting message, if flawed in its execution. From my perspective, all I can really gauge is the quality of the episode as a whole. Do I think this is a good My Little Pony episode? That's a great question. Do I think that this is a funny episode? Not really. I don't know what it is, but any humor derived from a character dressing up as a member of a different sex felt really tired and boring to me when I was a kid. I can mostly forgive the episode for being unfunny because, as HoovesAreBetter alluded to, it comes from a desire to feel emotionally needed by his baby sister. There's an extended, expertly paced scene that closes the episode where you get to see a usually tough and stoic character break down and admit that he feels superfluous in the life of somebody he really cares about. Peter New and Michelle Kreber absolutely knock it out of the park in this scene and reinforce their relationship in a really tender way that takes on extra weight when you realize the episode that follows this one. Oh, and there was an original episode about this event too, believe it or not. Sisterhood Social is the original storyline about this event from 3 seasons prior, but otherwise it shares very little DNA with its sequel episode. This one centers around the Act 3 plot twist, an exceedingly rare move by MLP standards. It also has the fortune of coming early enough in the initial watch that I didn't have the twist spoiled for me because I'd memorized the eye colors of all the main cast. It can get pretty grating early on as the show tries to refine Rarity and Sweetie Belle's relationship as sisters, but like the previous entry, there's this sweet ending that more than makes up for it. In the last week of August 2017, writer M.A. Larson hosted 2 panels as part of the 2017 BronyCon convention in British Columbia. You can find the first half of his panel online and in the description below, but at the top of the panel, Larson spends over 10 minutes defending himself against an episode that had premiered 2 weeks earlier with his writing credit on it. One that, for better or worse, has become one of the most consistently controversial episodes in fan discussion since its premiere. Fame and Misfortune sees the Journal of Friendship turned into a hardcover book and given out to citizens of Ponyville in an attempt to spread the message of friendship. What results is the town descending into chaos over their different surface-level interpretations of these very real ponies. It's a bizarrely meta episode which neither I nor Larson were particularly fond of. My Little Pony as a series has too much genuine energy and enthusiasm for the world it inhabits and the stories it tells to feel like it has to use meta storytelling in any sort of effective context. Larson even tried to pitch a reworked version of this episode that was less focused on ribbing the brony fandom and more on telling a complete story about the importance of internet etiquette, which was eventually rejected. What ends up on screen is a weirdly mean-spirited episode that fails in 3 aspects. 1. Why are all the ponies assholes?
Why are we taking ponies that everybody loves and having them be assholes and having them still be assholes at the end of the episode? I didn't get it. I didn't understand why that was a good idea.
This entire town of side characters that we've gotten to know and love is suddenly up in arms about these girls that they've known for years. 2. The song Flawless, which by my account is a top 10 banger of a song, gets trapped in this odd vendetta of an episode, stuck in a metaphor that doesn't work in an episode that doesn't deserve it. You could poke the metaphor in that song with a stick and get it to topple over, but that's not the biggest issue I have with this episode. 3. This episode, straight up, does not have an ending. Even if you ignore all the misplaced aggression and broken metaphors, when the credits roll, the town is still in mob form outside the castle. It's like the episode ran out of time and didn't bother to add one. I mean, say all you want about how terrible the conclusion was to A Matter of Principles, but at least it had one. 123, The Mean Six. Didn't we do this one already? I know it sounds like I'm doing a bit, but I'm being very serious here. Was creating evil, opposite-day versions of each of the core cast and letting them loose in the wild not already a huge plot point in the return of Harmony all the way back in season 2? These are serviceable almost jokes, but aside from that horrific melting sequence, this one doesn't really add all that much to revive an already discarded idea. 122, the Mod couple. We open on Mod at the comedy club working on her tight 5. Somebody in the writer's room thinks this joke's really funny, and this time I actually agree with them. But we can't keep the good times rolling because Mod has a boyfriend now. Mudbriar reminds me of this Jimmy Neutron fanfiction I wrote when I was 9 where Carl Wheezer reveals that he has a girlfriend named Carlita who acts just like him and likes all the same stuff. I'll let you decide if that's a bad thing. Despite them being more exciting than a bag full of sticks and bricks, they have a ton of chemistry together, which is all I can really ask for. 121, Appaloosa's Most Wanted. Tiny Cute Ponies take the first big Season 5 step to earning their cutie marks when they set out to help BoJack Horseman from being misunderstood. It's really neat to see a character like Troubleshoes make an appearance in a kid's show in a way that he can interact meaningfully with the younger members of the cast without it being weird. 120, The Fault in Our Cutie Marks. Following what is, no joke, the best cold open in the entire series, the Crusaders try to do the impossible by helping Gabby Gryphon get a cutie mark. The episode stalls a bit as the girls try to figure out some way around the problem besides brutal honesty, but Aaron Matthews plays Gabby with effortless charm while the girls figure out what to do. It's also got an equally upbeat song about her trying to excel at everything under the sun, and if I can have just a second to present the coolest hidden detail in this entire series to me, there's a line in this song about Gabby helping a quartet write and perform music. The music that she writes is the theme song to the show. I felt like such a badass for catching that, and while the notation is a little lacking, my workstation says it totally checks out. 119, Molt Down. Spike's rather distressed by all the changes his body's going through as a part of the dragon molting process. This heart-to-heart talk with Ember in the janitor's closet was pretty good, but otherwise it's pretty straightforward. This episode seems like it doesn't have a ton of faith in its core premise because we add in this bit about Rarity being hard of hearing that kind of muddies the waters. But I'll turn a blind eye because the other one got pecked out by this awesome giant bird. This is your second reminder that I will always take more monster fights in my pony show. 118, Daring Don't. Welcome back to Rainbow Dash Loves Daring Do, only this time she's real. Some people were rubbed the wrong way by the decision to defictionalize Daring Do, but I'm not bothered by it. What I see here is the writing team realizing that the adventures of Daring Do were way too fertile a soil for stories to pass up, and retooled what was already a crowd-pleasing episode into something more versatile. I think it's time for another Spike episode. Dragon Quest is a very sweet episode for a sidelined character to ask questions about where he comes from, especially in a world so richly designed to appeal to a feminine demographic. The ponies are still here, stealing the show from behind the funniest dragon costume you've ever seen, but there's more than enough toxic macho energy here from Garble, played with Smelly Machismo by Sandbar, Featherbangs, Pony Joe, Vincent Tong. 4 seasons later, the gang would go back to the Dragonlands with similar results in the Season 6 episode Gauntlet of Fire. I love the designs of these new characters. Dragonlord Torch is comically massive with some rad horns, and Ember exudes this quiet confidence about her without falling victim to the girl boss shorthand that plagued a lot of kids shows from the previous decade. There's more action again, and it's overall a really dope episode if you put up with the cold open with Spike and Rarity in the caves. Speaking of which, I have to talk about this. For pretty much the entire series, Spike has had this sort of puppy love crush on Rarity. In the very, very early days, I'm talking pilot era, before Hasbro knew this show was going to explode in popularity like it did, Spike has a quick throwaway gag where he crushes on Rarity when they meet for the first time at Carousel Boutique. It starts normally enough with hearts in the eyes and floating particle effects, and that's fine. What would slowly make this severely awkward was a two-pronged problem where the show continued to give Spike both a huge crush on Rarity as well as a really unhealthy looking doting assistant role. This left the show with two options: either drop the crush gag from the pilot and move on, or just explicitly state that you two were just friends. And the show just kind of chose to do neither, and it caused this blind spot in the show that's aged rather poorly, where viewers don't know how to contextualize their relationship, and it leads to a kind of gross feeling whenever it comes up. There's even a song by fan creator Violet Pony that touches on this whole ugly situation called Non-Existent Meet Cute, and it sort of overslaps this entire episode. The can really feel it in fan reaction to the very last time the series would bring up this relationship, and I want to talk about it. Dragon Dropped does more right than fans give it credit for, and I'm not just talking about what might be the greatest pun episode in the entire series. Spike has a new friend in Gabby the Gryphon, a cool returning character that actually has a lot in common with Spike.
We both come from cultures that don't have the friendliest of reputations.
And we're both in the message-sending business.
It's tough to tell if this is a friendly or a romantic engagement, but look at the subtext with that cherry and tell me the writers weren't leaving something up for interpretation. Rarity knows this, and so does Tabitha St. Germain, because holy shit, she is leaving it all in the recording booth here. There are say-anything gags and friends trying to fill in for Spike and desperate sudden onset emptiness that Tabitha gives some serious gas. Yeah, it's not a great Rarity episode, but mainly I feel like this episode is trying to make up for 9 seasons of her treating Spike like she did. As part of trying to tie up all loose ends in the final season, I think the writing team sort of came around to realizing that this relationship is sort of soured from being left out in the sun, and we're trying to course correct Rarity into a satisfying sense of understanding that Rarity fans and the rest of us can live with. Buckball season introduces the fairly new sport of buckball, which simultaneously enriches the world while also earning Andrea Libman and Ashley Ball some sort of voice acting award for voicing 4 characters between 2 people. Pinky and Shy are the absolute cutest here, and it's so much fun to watch them enjoy a new sport. And if any animators out there can help me out, was Pinky's hair put up like that as a visual choice or an animation shortcut? It's fine either way, I'm just really curious. 113, It's About Time. My Little Pony dabbles in time travel. This one's got a lot of fun costuming moments, including Terminator Twilight and Catsuit Pinky, and not including that other one. This is also one of those lessons that early series Twilight desperately needed to learn, and I'm glad they found a fun way to work it in. Some call the payoff to this episode obvious, but I liked it. On its own, Honest Apple could make a good essay about criticism and review culture. Applejack gets asked to help Rarity judge a fashion competition and learns a bit about slanting your words in the process. But the fashion contestants are fun, and Pinky's guitar lessons are funny. Mainly though, that scene in the back half of the episode of AJ, Rarity, and Strawberry Gal is the absolute most savage scene in the entire series. It's hysterical, and it gave birth to a meme in my house that I can't repeat in polite conversation.
What?
Pretty good. 111, The Big Mac Question. The whole idea of this story being told right before the wedding itself was a very sweet creative decision. As I'll touch on later, Spike and Big Mac are the perfect people to deal with Discord and his shenanigans, and I wish the show had realized this sooner. There's also a blink and you'll miss it detail in the episode where Granny Smith recounts a Star Trek dream she had with Mudbriar as Spock and John Delancey reprising his role as Q.
And we were in outer space on some kind of mission to explore a strange new world. And Mudbriar was there, being as logical as ever. But his ears was all corny-like. And then Discord showed up. Well, you know, he was pretty much the same.
One of the trickier parts about writing Discord post-transformation is remembering that Discord was originally a bad dude. Not just any bad dude, the literal embodiment of chaos. The return of Harmony swings the show right back where it left off at the start of season 2 with some serious edge and energy, 80% of which is brought by John Delancey. Delancey channels a lot of the same character energy as his anti-hero Q from Star Trek, which might explain why Lauren Faust thought they were doing a Tribbles episode in season 1. This season kicks off with its own encounter at Farpoint, and I love the sinister attitude Discord and the Hedge Maze are bringing to this episode. There's some added animation flourishes, and we get these really fun opposite day versions of the girls. There's also this really cool balloon chase set piece in the second half of the episode, which to be honest is really the only thing I remember from the back half, but it's still a strong episode and proof that the show hadn't lost any of its charm. The Summer Sun setback is this sort of microcosm in the change in power that takes place at the end of the season. It's a cool celebration, but it also hints at Discord's season-long botched motive, which I promise you is coming. In the first act or so, he's ready for Twilight to freak out at the added responsibility. When she doesn't, that's enough to freak even him out.
Oh, character growth is so boring.
Remember that you said that, buddy, because we'll be back later. And despite the meta-commentary excusing some wishy-washier episodes, Twilight does have to get ready to rule, so the girls have to do it themselves. Meanwhile, the big bad triumvirate have to get some book to learn how to use the Grogar Bell, and in doing so, nearly cause a complete race war in, 3 hours? It's a point that gets lampshaded for foreshadowing in the series finale, but it's also something that's become eerily more prescient every time I go back to watch this show. 108, Stu student council. Aren't responsibilities awful? This weird patchwork of a group has to find one of the missing students after Starlight tries to make time for Trixie, inadvertently making for a better Mudbriar episode, a much funnier Maud, and an infinitely stankier Trixie. It's also nice to see Terramar and the cockatrices again, really fleshes out the whole world. Let's talk about the Stare, a plot significant ability that would later be discarded by the series either as a result of not having enough context-sensitive opportunities to use it, for having a weird mind control undertone that feels a little odd, or for just not being funny. But the ability does get a semi-decent send-off in Staremaster when Fluttershy agrees to babysit the CMCs. It's cute that at this point in the series, the Crusaders are literally just little girls. Sweetie Belle doesn't understand euphemisms, and Scootaloo gets teased for sounding like a chicken. This is how little girls actually hang out, so points for that. It's also charmingly irritating that the Crusaders feel the need to shout everything they're doing, and that is not sarcasm. The gift of the Mod Pie pulls off the gift of the Magi with enough flavor to keep it from just being the Magi episode. It's wild to me that it took them this long to get another Mod episode, given how easily she gels with older established characters. The episode drags a tad in the middle around all the sightseeing gags, but the real star of the show is Tabitha St. Germain getting to stretch her VA chops. Between her impression of Pinky and her feigned interest in Boulder, she does this wonderful job conveying the exasperated panic of a regular character trapped in a room with an introvert and an extrovert. Newbie Dash earns extra points from me for allowing Dash to be unenthusiastically overjoyed about something. Some people found that this episode rushed through a huge career milestone for a fan favorite character out of nowhere, but maybe a different framing device could have helped that. If you look at this episode as the last hurdle to her becoming a Wonderbolt, the story gets a lot better. And yes, this felt like an excuse plot to have Dash imitate her friends. It's cringe, but I love it when characters imitate each other. It's a fun character exercise, and the VAs always have a lot of fun doing it. Still, I can see why this episode sticks in people's craws. Some of the excuses made for hazing don't age well, and the justification that it's always been like that is sort of appeal to tradition that the show doesn't usually give the time of day. Maybe if Rainbow Dash had talked to Spitfire, they could have discussed it, or Spitfire could have had a moment where she says, "I'm sorry, Dash, I didn't know." Maybe it could have been cleaned up. That scene with Rainbow Dash cleaning is cute, and her smile in the cold open is absolutely infectious. 104, the Hooffields and McColts. Twilight and Fluttershy are the cutest pair ever as they get sent to solve the totally serviceable friendship problem of the Hooffields and McColts. Both girls get time to shine, and this episode manages to be both a friendship lesson and a history lesson simultaneously. 103, green isn't your color. Despite being sitcom as hell, there's a lot to look forward to here, including the first recorded sighting of Photo Finish, a character that I never thought would gain traction in a show like this. The concept of keeping secrets from and for friends is expressed really well in the two plots of Spike Rarity and Fluttershy Rarity. I also love that we can reinforce the idea that someone can positively hate doing something, and you just have to take that at face value. 102, the Crystalling. For what it's worth, the showrunners really hit the ground running trying to smooth over the fissures left in the fanbase by the cutie remark, which we'll definitely talk about later. Every minute we get to spend with Starlight and Sunburst is a treat, and it's one of the reasons that I, a poor and repentant Glimmer hater, was so willing to give her another chance in the first place. It's really exciting to suddenly have another male member of the core cast, and I can't wait to see what they do with him. It's clear from this Act 1 PTSD gag that there's a lot of unresolved tension there that we'll get to explore fully instead of making a pit stop at the end of a season finale. But first, it's time for a baby shower. The Crystalling is another cool tradition that feels like it fits organically into the world of Equestria, even if I could do without the sort of lame C-plot about the rest of the gang running interference with the townsfolk. 101, Rarity investigates. Rarity and Rainbow Dash have to solve the mystery of who tried to frame Dash out of being a Wonderbolt. Both characters get time to shine, but Rarity takes a much-needed lesson in fun with her sexy Carmen Sandiego getup. Lots of this episode is rendered in black and white, giving it this cool noir edge, and Dash is an overly cartoonish version of herself to compensate. It's a really fun episode, even if you know how it ends. Alright, top 100. I'd say by now we're firmly in 7 out of 10 territory. Everything from here on out is at worst comfort food. Unfortunately, it also means I gotta be a little harder on these episodes that start flirting with greatness. Sakura was originally envisioned by Lauren Faust to be something of a pony mentor to the main cast, someone they could come to for guidance with a problem. And to some extent, she does sometimes do that, including one fantastic episode in season 3 that we'll get to later. I'm not a fan of the rhyming couplets, and I'll get to that later, but interestingly, that wasn't a cultural decision, but a note from the Hub, MLP's network, to make her stand out more. She's a pretty rad side character that's never really played for laughs, a genuine all-rounder. But there's a really troubling question here. Where are the other zebras? Wootmaster has a really insightful Twitter thread from 2019 that explains the situation with more eloquence than I could ever hope to have on the matter. It was planned at the outset of the series for the show to feature more zebras, to expand her as a character and to give her more of a role in the series. But for whatever reason, Hasbro began to shy away almost completely from species that might bear too much of a coded resemblance to real-life demographics that might be alienated from their product line or something. It's even more frustrating when you find out that the showrunners wanted to do at least one more episode exploring Zecora's background and upbringing, an idea that Hasbro shot down basically immediately. That stinks. I would have loved more backstory on her given the show's stellar history of dealing with the pasts of its main characters. To pretty heavily paraphrase Woot, either explore zebra culture and history and these weird questions that arise because of this character you've lovingly created, or don't include zebras. Kids are smarter than they've ever been, and I struggle to believe they couldn't handle cultural nuance that had real-world parallels. Right now you've dropped everyone into this negative possibility space where I want to know more about her, but I can't because Hasbro doesn't trust the emotional intelligence of its core demographic, and that bums me out, especially with how unusually progressive we now know a new generation was. Kids can handle these ideas about prejudice and hatred and cultural differences now, and for a show as intelligent as we know it is, this lack of interest in stories like this that you've admitted exists somewhere really saps my enjoyment of the series. For a majority of the show's run, Zecora is a plot point, a shaman character that was literally named Shaman during pre-production, who exists only to whip up potions for someone else, whenever Apple Bloom needs a cutie mark, or Fluttershy needs help gathering swamp moss, or when Pinkie Pie needs more shampoo. Bridal gossip was a step in the right direction. A little ham-fisted maybe, but in a political climate that I'm not going to get into, I think as many kids as possible need to hear this lesson. Aside from the straightforward nature of don't judge a book by its cover, this iteration of it does three things exceptionally well. 1. Apple Bloom, the innocent youth of this story, is the voice of reason here, the one who has no idea what's so bad about being a zebra. Prejudice isn't learned, it's taught. 2. Making the main 6 the ones with the short-sightedness. These girls who you're begging to grow attached to can make mistakes too, and know when to admit that they've judged Zecora too harshly. Speaking of which, 3. Twilight quite literally judging a book by its cover. The smartest character in the show and the lens through which we view this world being the one to fall for the easiest mistake to make. It's not a perfectly polished example, but it's a sign of the really cool in-depth ideas that the show would tackle down the line. 99. Too many Pinkie Pies. Pinkie Pie has intense fear of missing out over the idea of not being able to spend time with all her friends at once, so she comes across the magical mirror pond and clones herself to the point that cotton candy chaos envelops Ponyville, resulting in even the real Pinkie Pie questioning the genuineness of her own existence. Now, normally I think arguments like this are dumb and missing the forest for the trees in what is otherwise a grounded episode about learning to temper expectations, but I'm also a huge fan of shows like Black Mirror and The Twilight Zone, and thought experiments about clones' rights gets me all kinds of excited. I won't talk about it here, but if that interests you, go Google what measure is a non-human and really enjoy the rabbit hole I went down. Otherwise, this is a fairly standard episode with a wildly fun set of gags right at the end. Good stuff if you don't think too hard about it. 98. Castle Mania. The gang goes on a fluffy, disjointed Scooby-Doo style adventure through the long-abandoned castle of the two sisters. It's a steady parade of fun gags, and it introduces the friendship journal to the show, which I really enjoy. We're also getting more Apple Dash fuel, which is conveniently what my Honda runs on, so thank you for that. 97. Games Ponies Play. A well-rounded episode that provides gags, character growth, and expanded lore about the universe. Rarity and Cadence get to hang out for once, and this shot of Rainbow Dash splatting on the dome is really funny. They don't make fun of the Nebraska pony, and that's good, because I grew up in the Midwest and I've heard those jokes several 100,000 times already. This is also a great episode that allows Twilight to start adopting those traits that will turn her into a great princess, and I can't wait for it. Oh hey, the first appearance of Maud Pie. It's wild for how popular a character she is that she doesn't even appear until near the end of season 4. The girls fail to jive with Pinkie's sister in an episode that threatens to become so repetitive that you almost begin to hate everyone involved. All of it is set in front of this matte painting of Pinkie Pie spinning the most colorful physical comedy you're gonna see in this series, and that emotional through line with those candy necklaces actually pays off in the end, so great job sticking the landing. To Change a Changeling addresses how the changelings are getting along since adapting away from the need to feed on the love of others. And this leads to a really naturalistic predator-prey chain of events that ends with the hive having to deal with a big ol' Malworth. The misdirection here is that the Malworth isn't really the focus of the episode. Pharynx having trouble adapting to civilian life leads into some ideas about the need for military presence in peacetime, but I think it's better juxtaposed against the pacifism of Good Boy Thorax and less one of those lessons lessons that ages like milk for trying too hard to relate to a real-life analogy. Also a fantastic Star Trek episode and some wonderful snark from sarcastic Blue Horse. My wife gets really mad at Equestria Games because she's disappointed that this event that's been hyped for 2 seasons turns out to be a spike vehicle. My rebuke of that is twofold. One, the episode that actually closes out this season happens to be a top 10 episode on this list, so I'm okay with this taking a back seat. And two, except for that heaping pile of cringe when Kathy Westluck improvised all of the Cloudsdale anthem in one take, this is a really tender episode that explores a lot of Spike's fears about feeling needed and being ostracized. The show tried this twice before in 2 other episodes, neither of them very good. But it feels like they finally got a Spike episode right, and we get a really sweet look at Best Dragon and an unironically awesome save the day moment on top of it. 93, The Lost Treasure of Gryphonstone. Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash rudely interrupt Best Gator during his impromptu cooking show so they can invent an entirely new episode structure. It helps that these characters, while different, aren't exactly opposites, so they get to shine in their own way instead of butting heads with each other.
Always carry plenty of bits. The Griffins are sure to help you as long as you share the wealth.
Oh hey guys, look! It's our show's version of A Christmas Carol. Isn't it wild to see characters that you know and love playing roles in this well-known work in the public domain? The best thing that ever happened to A Hearthwarming Tale is the fact that to make sure I still hated it, I went back and watched it one more time. And maybe my heart grew a couple sizes since then, but the songs are really sweet and well arranged, and Shannon Chan Kent is my goddess and I love her. If there's one thing it flops on, it's this problem I mentioned an hour ago about giving new Starlight on the block time to breathe. Her first starring role was 2 episodes ago, and obscuring her with a Charles Dickens character might have hiccuped her integration a little harshly this early in the game. 91, The Last Laugh. You are playing with nuclear fire attempting to bring back a fan-favorite character like Cheese Sandwich. Pinkie Pride is almost universally beloved, but with this new slant about Pinkie trying to find her life's purpose, things actually work out pretty well. This whole episode sets up to be a looming Willy Wonka plot down to the guard ponies saying,
"No pony ever comes out and no pony ever goes in, including you."
Almost verbatim, but with enough of a mind to stay on task with Weird Al on the voice cast. There's some philosophical waxing about losing that spark in yourself, but nothing that gets too lofty that it drowns in its own ambition. 90, the one where Pinkie Pie knows. Pinkie achieves the impossible by simultaneously hiding a pregnancy secret and keeping the episode afloat. There's a ton of great physical comedy here from both Pinkie and Little Boy Shining Armor, as long as you don't think too hard about the concept of pregnant horses. Princess Twilight Sparkle retroactively turns Magical Mystery Cure into the first part of a trilogy, and shows enormous restraint in choosing to step back and reinforce the storied history of turmoil in Equestria. It's this kind of restraint that tricked me into thinking I didn't like this episode for a while, but it's reinforcing some dark elements of the show that can get glossed over, like the fact that every summer sun celebration, Celestia has to remember that she banished her little sister to the moon. Yikes. But there's also some fun bits about Twilight learning to fly, and the animation on this opening scene is disgustingly good looking. There was a serious animation bump for the season premiere, and I can feel it. In June of 2019, halfway through the final season, Discovery Family released the hour-long special My Little Pony Rainbow Road Trip, produced by Boulder Media, the same company who would later helm A New Generation, in a style nearly identical to the 2017 movie, with softer faces, less rigid body structures, and a slightly toned-down color palette for 80% of the runtime. Rainbow Dash is the guest of honor at something called the Rainbow Festival, so the gang tags along to Hope Hollow and quickly finds out that not everything is on the up and up. From there, it's basically a double-length episode of My Little Pony that plays out like a point-and-click adventure. That's not the enormous dig I intended for it to be, since the side characters are all fleshed out and inoffensive, but the real star of the show here is my boy Sunny Skies, who harbors this intense worry that he's letting the town down year after year, culminating in a really fun, touching song about the loss of community and a really poignant double meaning to the phrase "end of the rainbow." 87, What Lies Beneath. The Student Six take a break from summarizing the history of the show you're watching to face their fears in a labyrinth under the school library. It works decently well, and the kids have a little mini arc where they tell the Scorpion and the Toad exactly where they can shove it, but this episode makes the wildly peculiar choice to hint at Cozy Glow's intentions with an obnoxious musical flourish right at the end of the episode. That's not really foreshadowing, that's using a viewer's media literacy against them in a way that makes them think that they missed out on something. 86, Granny's Gone Wild. Rainbow Dash chaperones Granny Smith and her friends to Las Pegasus so she can go on some Wonderbolt hazing coaster before it closes for good. I always love when media directed at younger kids uses a giant arcade as a stand-in for a casino. Contrary to popular belief, casinos do actually want you to have a good time, which is why I'm glad they punched up the gold horseshoe gals. Old people can have a different kind of fun, and you can't bash that. Not even if you're a total gomer like Rainbow Dash. But they all make up in the end, and Applejack the Knobby Head is none the wiser. SpinScissor. 85, The Showstoppers. This one's not great in hindsight, but it's the first episode that shows the Crusaders have actual chemistry that help this cutie mark subplot flow so much better than if it were just Apple Bloom by herself. There's this hint that they should be getting their cutie marks by trading jobs with one another that doesn't seem to catch on later in the series, and that's fine, because it leads to a wonderfully awful performance from the girls that assures them and the audience that it's okay to fall flat on your ass after trying something new. 84, Pinky Apple Pie. Oh hey, Pinky and Applejack are kind of, sort of, definitely, maybe related, but just to make sure they go on a family trip to check in with the family historian. The rest of this episode is a fun A to B journey with a boppin' song and a reminder that Michelle Kreber has improved immensely as a voice actress. It seems like it was just 3 seasons ago that she was trying not to stumble over her lines, and now look at her. Shannon Chan Kent is great as always, and everyone is just adorable. 83, A Health of Information. Fluttershy channels her inner mage Meadowbrook to keep Sakura from getting so sick that she turns into a tree. We get this really neat look at Hayseed Swamp, a really cool New Orleans setting complete with an awesome swamp and a cool village. The healer's mask worn by Meadowbrook was given stripes to make it pop more and to keep it from freaking out kids and adults because it reminded them too much of those creepy masks with lavender in the beak to prevent the bubonic plague back in the day. In at least the first season of the show, at the end of each episode, Twilight wrote a letter to Princess Celestia about a friendship lesson she learned that episode. It was unobtrusive and likely only to satisfy the EI requirement the show had at the beginning. As the hub became less concerned with meeting those government requirements, and especially when they rebranded as Discovery Family, the show moved away from this kind of structure. But before that, in order to allow for ease of producing moralistic episodes, the show wrote Lesson 0, which allowed the other members of the cast to write Celestia at the end of episodes. It also allowed us to look into Twilight's psyche that, for a show this emotionally intelligent, feels a little demeaning, what with the eye twitches, ear twitches, and slowly disheveled mane over the course of the episode. There are later episodes that deal with Twilight's neuroses with so much more nuance and clarity down the line that this episode is lucky it's as funny as it is. This feels like an episode about anxiety written from the perspective of a normal person, and it shows. 81, A Royal Problem. The show achieves some sisterly appreciation by trotting out the trade jobs plot device. It's a cousin of the Freaky Friday trope, so I'm on board, mainly because it's so hard to do episodes like this wrong. Twilight continues her maddening descent into Flanderization, but you do get this rad Act 3 stuff with Daybreaker, and you know I'm always itching for monster fights in this series. 80, Putting Your Hoof Down. Wouldn't it be awesome if just for one episode my favorite character was an out-of-control monster? Some people disagree, but I like this kind of fun one-off episode. Iron Will is a cool pastiche of those self-help chuds who can't quit catchphrasing, and this episode gave birth to one of my favorite bits of physical humor in the entire series. I like that this episode didn't include unnecessary other characters in the script, and I think a single out-of-character Fluttershy episode is fine. There are a lot of fun little nods I could focus on in Secret of My Excess, from the King Kong nod in Act 3 to the more subtle play on the tune from The Sorcerer's Apprentice. But the cleverness of this premise is something I don't hear praised by nearly enough fans. This innate tendency of dragons to react naturally to hoarding things, and the element of generosity having to combat that, is a really cool through line. And it works worlds better than if they had just revealed that Spike was being a jerk. Every kid show ever made wishes that by the end of their run they receive half the level of lore love that My Little Pony receives in its first season and a half. Hearthwarming Eve manages to weave an original history around a very ponified Christmas, and doesn't rest on its Christmas wreaths by telling an old, worn-out tale about the true meaning of Christmas. I mean, they sort of do, but there's enough drama and peril here to keep you on your toes, and the show is content to ditch the aesthetic of a Christmas pageant pretty quickly so it doesn't get away from the core of the story. Later seasons get a lot of flack for straining a bit to come up with new episode plots after being on the air for so long. It's a natural thing to happen to a long-running show, and it's where you end up with episodes like Frenemies, Triple Threat, and Father Knows Beast. But hear me out. There are some episodes that only work because you've had 7 seasons to get to know these characters. Episodes where you know that 2 characters just belong together, but the show throws a wrench at them, and one of them zigs and the other zags, and it just feels wrong, because you know that by now these 2 should be able to work anything out. That's the magic trick pulled by Season 7's Uncommon Bond. This idea that things can still get in the way of friendship after all the hard work you've put in. Other episodes have tried this before with quite a bit of clunkiness, but what makes it hurt here is the effortlessness with which Sunburst slips slips in with some of Starlight's closest friends. In much the same way she connects with them over magic, a troubled past, or a fascination with something mundane, Sunburst has that same sort of connection. And this larger sense of scope and how different friends form a common bond over something completely outside your orbit makes this a surprisingly elegant episode. And I say that about an episode with a super cute dragon board game that I'm so mad doesn't exist. 76, The Main Attraction. Lena Hall guest stars in an episode about whether star power can really change someone, culminating in a very serious contender for Best Song of the series. After a backup pony dance show and a wonderful magical auto-tune joke that you can treat as seriously as you want to, Applejack and Rah Rah have a borderline mature discussion about what their idol connection means now that she's in a different coat of paint. They stutter over their words, feelings get hurt, but they pull together in time for a really clean, effective ending. All things said, this should be a top 30, maybe even a top 20 episode, and the reason it's not is voiced by Colin Murdoch. Sven Gallop is the set of oven mitts with which the show is trying to remake Starry Night. This safety airbag buffer of a character that makes sure we don't get too close to dealing with mature themes that all too often get hyperbolized past the point of having any meaningful discussion about them. The fall guy that makes sure we have a bad guy with a name and a face to blame when something in our life changes. Sven Gallop has a different flavor of Chancellor Naysay entitlement that didn't work then and doesn't work now. And for those of you worried I'm taking a kid's horse show a little too seriously, I meant what I said back at Bridal Gossip. When you flirt with really mature ideas like this, you have to pop the bubble, or I'm just going to be disappointed that you blew the bubble in the first place. So I'm a big fan of that Ed, Edd n Eddy episode where the gang tries desperately to make a giant omelet. Not sure why I brought that up. Anyway, the girls head back to Rainbow Falls for the annual Traders Exchange, and immediately the gang fractures into thirds and all chaos breaks loose. Traja is really similar to Castlemania from a ways back in that it's just a segmented set of shenanigans from when the sun comes up to the sun goes down, provided you can ignore the fact that Rainbow Dash tried to trade Fluttershy into servitude. And I love the fact that Discord lamps exist in this universe, that there's somebody out there passionate enough to make several of them to show to the world. Pony ingenuity astounds me. 74, Inspiration Manifestation. Spike and Rarity channel their inner Goosebumps protagonist, and I actually do mean that in a good way. Rarity comes into possession of a spooky old book that allows her to will anything into existence. The sort of low-key omnipotence is just light enough that it allows for a handful of fun gags, but with this foreboding air that allows Rarity to slowly unspool into a complete mania and a wonderful Trixie impression. This is one of those rare moments where the show manages to acknowledge the really unhealthy power dynamic between these two, and I just wish they did it more often. There's nothing really super exceptional going on when it comes to growing up is hard to do. A bunch of kids wish they had control of their lives, and things go sideways real fast once they get it. I first remember this happening with the Jimmy Neutron movie back in 2001, and a few other times since then, but it's not like anyone owns this concept, so it's not really worth talking about. Oh hey, another key episode, it's been a while. Rarity Takes Manhattan takes a place of social standing that she's strived for all her life, that embodies the natural antithesis to what she stands for, and asks her to reconcile those two by way of a sweeping musical number and the cutest stinking side character you've ever seen. Rarity's turn from Queen of Generosity to doing whatever it takes to win was pretty rough. Like Suri Polymer flipped a switch in her from off to on. And she kinda did. I mean, can you believe these two were voiced by the same person? But the setup was really solid, and I can appreciate the excitement it sets up for more of these kinds of episodes later in the season. 71, The Cutie Pox. Apple Bloom learns the hard way that using ancient magic to arrive at your happy ending has horrific consequences, and the show pans that out in its own unique way. Apple Bloom's a little showboaty for me, but I appreciate how understated the horror angle is on this one, with kid-friendly but still spooky situations like not being able to speak English or stop tap dancing. 70, Fake It Till You Make It. Fluttershy tides over Rarity for you by putting on gag quick change personas that take the absurdity in this one up to 11 as her personalities start to consume her. This episode is a rare one where the focus is less on the lesson of the episode and more on the gags. But Hipster Shy melted my heart before it was cool, and we got the first sighting in a long time of that old Rarity logo from season 1. 69, Sweet and Elite. I love Rarity's hustle. Girl's on a trip to Canterlot and she still finds time to schmooze on high society on top of an entire birthday party. That song by Kazumi Evans is all the proof anyone should ever need that Rarity could do anything and everything and that nobody should ever doubt her. This one's a little too took 2 dates to the prom for me, but Twilight's dorky dance is so cute, and we get the first appearance of the party cannon, which Haley assured me was not going anywhere. 68, Road to Friendship. Starlight and Trixie channel their inner Bing Crosby and Bob Hope in a fun little travelogue to Saddle Arabia, complete with a really fun musical number. This whole episode is an homage to movies like Road to Singapore and Road to Rio, but you're probably like me and thought of those Family Guy episodes with Brian and Stewie. I mean, where do you think they got them? You could tell the writers really cared about the source material, and there's more than enough to keep the episode fresh. Like that cringy friendship chant that I really want to believe was done on the spot by Kathleen Barr and Kelly Sheridan. 67, Hearts and Hooves Day. Imagine my surprise when I find out while watching season 2 that Big Mac gets married at the end of the series and it's not to Cheerilee. But I love Sugar Bell all the same, and I won't live or die on which way Big Mac swings. But it is nice to see him get all lovey-dovey, even if it is against his will here. The CMCs mess around with free will and find out hard why not to do that. It's also a good start to separating each of the girls as their own characters with how romantic Sweetie Belle can get sometimes. It comes up more throughout the season and it's super cute. Okay, so embarrassing confession time. It didn't click for me until my third time watching The Hearthwarming Club that this whole episode is a play on the plot from The Breakfast Club. I mean, it's right there. Mainly I'm a sucker for anthologies, and I got distracted by everyone talking about their holiday traditions with their families. It's a cute story with a disarmingly emotional payoff that makes me really want to root for the aloof loner character. Quick content warning coming up in about 10 seconds if you're sensitive about the topic of self-harm, so feel free to skip ahead 30 seconds if you want out of that. It was a bold move bringing the Pillars of Equestria into the present day, but I can understand why they only really got one slice of life episode. A Rock Hoof in a Hard Place is another one of those episodes that I'm embarrassed to say did not immediately strike me as a metaphor for suicide, so my second viewing was an eye-opening experience. I think a lot of it is that it takes a while to get going, and it's not until the Act 2 break that you hear about this stone sleep spell, but that's about as pure a metaphor as you're gonna get here. Some people don't like episodes like this where the show tries to bite off more than it can chew with the weight of its own subject matter, but I think that an episode is only as good as how well it can execute on its premise, and in that regard, this one's pretty good. It helps that Yona's here to have a really genuine relationship with her new mentor, and it helps that the show doesn't pull a solution out of thin air. 64, Viva Las Pegasus. Flim and Flam return for round 3 of throwing a wrench into anything that moves. Speaking of which, have you noticed that we're in the low 60s now, and we're only just now getting to a Flim and Flam episode? They're fantastic Courage the Cowardly Dog level villains that radiate charisma no matter what they're doing, because voice actors Sam Vincent and Scott McNeil ooze charisma from the moment they wake up in the morning. This episode at least tries to mix up the formula by throwing in 2 new ingredients. One of those is Fluttershy, and her getting to put on extravagant outfits and hear out all the acts in Las Pegasus is very sweet. Oh, also, Las Pegasus. You already know I love Vegas and casino theming in my shows and movies, and this has a way of raising the stakes here with all the glamour and the backstabbing and the Glad Main Elvis look-alike. It's good stuff. Gryphon the Brush-Off has all the clunky writing and character bald spots that early episodes have, and that's to be expected. Like, it's weird when Rainbow says to Pinky, "Man, we never hang out together," but then they fit together like PB and J, even though we've only known these ponies for 5 episodes. What I was not ready for was an episode this early about standing up to terrible people that you thought were your friend. That's some hardball writing for a kid's show that we all recognize in hindsight took a little bit to get going, especially since for one appearance 94 episodes later, you don't really see Gilda again. Like, Rainbow full-on cut a toxic person out of her life and everything worked out. That's something I think more fans of all ages need to hear, and I'm glad it happened this early. Slice of Life is a relentlessly self-referential thank you to all the fans that helped Friendship is Magic succeed over the last 5 years, and decides to take the main cast out of the equation to spread love to all the side characters we've come to love, if not entirely know yet. We have extended scenes with Derpy, Dr. Hooves, Lyra, Bon Bon, and all these other people that make Ponyville what it is. And while it's still pretty funny, a lot of the humor here is derived from playful jabs at fandom speculation from almost a decade ago. These petrified in-jokes feel a little dated, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't having a good time. 61, Scaremaster. Fluttershy is forced to go out on Nightmare Night, the absolute worst night of the year for shy bird horses. It's a Halloween episode with all the fun visual gags you come to expect from a properly executed Halloween episode. From Roller Disco Pinky, Astro Dash, and this throwaway reference to Flutterbat from the previous season. There's some wheel spinning in the middle where a few of the gags rely too heavily on Shy being clearly uncomfortable in her situation, but when she really gives spookiness a shot, it's with an infectiously genuine energy that melts my heart. The anime cutout tea party is the clear standout scene and solidifies her best girl status even further. But what keeps this from being just a fun gag episode is something that my personal favorite episode also does. At the end of her first big successful scare, Fluttershy comes clean with the fact that, guys, I hate Nightmare Night more than anything in the world, and I'm never going to want to be a part of this. And that's okay. It's not for everyone, and the confidence to admit to your friends reflects better on her than any scare she could have come up with. Zephyr Breeze is just the worst. On top of being an irritating chauvinist mooch of a character, he's constantly spilling over into the realm of being an emotionally manipulative son and brother. So why then does Flutterbrudder not just get a pass, but a dedicated banger of a redemption song to himself? Honestly, I think it's because the rest of the cast never once lets him get up off the coals on this one. From Shy to Dash, Rarity, Dash, Twilight, and yes, even Rainbow Dash, everyone here is constantly pushing him to stop abusing the codependent tendencies of his parents and actually make something of himself. And that's absolutely crucial to keep this episode from completely falling apart on itself. Without all that extra vitriol, Zephyr falls into the character bubble of the lovable scamp, where despite the shenanigans he gets into, goes above reproach because he's your brother, gotta love him. No, you do not. That kind of character writing attitude is what leads to absurdly awful episodes like A Matter of Principles and Secrets and Pies, where these really visibly problematic characters could have been properly addressed and used as a learning experience instead of accidentally giving a pass to textbook gaslighting and emotional manipulation. The entire cast keeps Zephyr under their hoof the entire runtime and clutches a victory from the jaws of defeat that wouldn't have been stopped by 1,000 sassy Fluttershy faces. 59. Friendship University. The most on-brand thing about this episode is that even when Rarity puts on her plain Jane disguise, it's still the most gorgeous, chic, plain look imaginable, like she came out of the pages of a catalog from Abercrombie and Hitch. Rarity and Twilight take their own turn, going after the most versatile mid-series villains in the series, this time with a weirdly pointed jab at predatory college diploma mills. I mean, the general public had to see what was going on. The campus building is modeled after a Vegas wedding chapel. This heightened sense of satire is rarefied air for this show, and it's not something that they're especially well prepared to have discussions about. Luckily, the episode focuses more on surface level conflict, like the wizard they brought back to life falling for name recognition college education. It's been a while since we checked in on the School of Friendship, let's see how that's going. Oh, weaponizing friendship. That's neat. Not sure the metaphor was supposed to bend that way, but you look like you're having a good time. School Raise is a better bookend than that cramped backpack of a premiere that had to establish an entirely new direction for the series, as well as half a dozen other characters, but that's to be expected. It's cool that we have two antagonists butting heads with the main six this time, so it's refreshing that we have so many moving parts. Unfortunately, Chancellor Naysay is as big a strawman bigot as he was at the start of the season, and he feels like an unnaturally patronistic set-em-up knock-em-down villain. Meanwhile, we have more insight into Cozy's endgame, and it's interesting. I've always loved the inventive ways this show has toyed with how literally to take the metaphor that acts as the show's title. At the show's best, friendship is almost literally magic, and that sort of elegance in a show that can be pretty gaudy at times was really surprising and fresh. But Cozy seems to have missed the memo and tried to cut the knot straight to converting the concept of friendship directly into energy for militaristic use. That feels like a pretty heavy misstep. But this whole extended negotiation scene in Tartarus was really intriguing, and it brings up an opportunity for me to clear up a misconception that's always bothered me. A lot of fans have complained about the fate of the big bad triumvirate in the finale, stating that they shouldn't have turned Cozy to stone because she was a kid. Some have gone one step further to claim that she was groomed by T-Rex into helping her escape. And I'm not one to take accusations of grooming lightly, even in a children's show, given the reckless use of that word lately, but while T-Rex may have had a hand in using her to escape Tartarus, it's been stated explicitly that Cozy came to him first, asking all these questions about draining magic.
Each letter had so many questions about draining magic.
And you answered them?
The writing team accidentally buried the lead a bit too well with her one-note evil Shirley Temple bit, but there was enough intent here that I don't think we can entirely release her from culpability on the grounds of being a child. You could go further, but then we get into entire debates about the human capacity for evil, and I'm just here for cute horses and dragons and griffins and change. The best thing the wonky Season 1 had going for it was a freeing lack of focus for a new series designed to sell toys. This early in the series, the show didn't always have to do outrageous action-filled two-part finales. The Season 1 finale, The Best Night Ever, is a fun, self-contained quasi-anthology about hopes and dreams at the most prestigious pony event of the year. Things don't turn out in anyone's favor, chaos ensues, Queen C ensures that it all went according to plan, everyone laughs, fade to black. It's a lot of fun, and that gala song bops sufficiently for a season finale. Most importantly, the first time I watched this episode and it dawned on me that I had 8 more seasons to go, I got really excited. And if that's not the mark of a successful finale, I I don't know what is. It took 3 seasons, but the show finally found a place to put Discord where he clicks with the rest of the cast. The secret recipe used in Dungeons and Discords is finding the 2 least smooth bachelors, the 2 individuals who least care about what other people think of them, and seating them on either side of an immortal being who thrives on non sequiturs and cynicism. This entire episode, Discord's trying to penetrate this wall of bro energy, and the fact that they refuse to lose a game they aren't playing ironically brings Discord down to their level. The show's version of Dungeons and Dragons isn't even that big a focal point for the fact that it's in the title of the episode. For me, the focal point of this episode is finding an immovable force to combat this unstoppable ball of narcissistic energy that's grated on me for a long time. Now that he has someone to rein him in, the physics-bending gags come across as more of a bonding activity and less a quirky cry for attention. It's just a shame it took 3 seasons to figure this out. According to scripture, when Lauren Faust pitched this show, the folks at Hasbro loved it, but one of the notes was that there had to be a fashion horse. In my wildest dreams, I could never have envisioned her being the most fully realized character in the series. Canterlot Boutique is the next step in Fashion Horse's already decorated career path, and no matter how many notches in her rhinestone-encrusted belt, there will always be more to unfold about Rarity, and that blows me away. Sassy Saddles plays the easy enough to ignore role of the personification of making creative compromise in exchange for professional success, and this musical refrain throughout the episode of Rarity's own brand of TLC is something you really believe that she's taken to heart. She's got all the grace of a wedding planner, and she knows that these moments of frivolity and self-admiration are just as important as anything more modest or grounded might be. But please, for the love of Celestia, quit letting Rarity hog all the best songs. We're now at the point of this video where you'll start seeing episodes that could reasonably fall into everyone liked that territory. 4 different fans who took my survey liked Hurricane Fluttershy enough to put it as their number 1, and I get that. Apart from the very clear focal point of this episode that is the first appearance of Bulk Biceps, this is also a really strong Fluttershy episode on top of the very unnecessary but totally appreciated lore construct regarding this annual reservoir cyclone thing that the Pegasi do every year. The nod to 1950s educational film reels was really cool, and I love anytime this show experiments with a different art style. 53, Wonderbolt's Academy. Rainbow Dash takes the first step in achieving her dreams, and that step walks right through the office of my wife's new favorite character. No matter how much credit I give to what a big deal it was that Rainbow Dash stood up to Spitfire of all people, it will never be enough to match the iron wrecking balls of the biggest loudmouth in the series telling off her hero, the second biggest loudmouth in the series, because some Andrew Neiman wannabe wants to run everyone over on the way to the finish line. That's serious character growth at a time I wasn't expecting it, so it catches me off guard every time. 52, Sleepless in Ponyville. Scootaloo gets the best Counselor Luna episode as we talk about found family and the bond of sisterhood that everyone should get to experience. Scootaloo shows really genuine, terrified vulnerability about not living up to the expectations of her hero and sister figure, and it's a palpable tension even around all the hammy renditions of campfire songs and hokey ghost stories. As we get into the top 50 episodes, a big testament to the show's quality is that the episodes we have left to talk about are a really homogenous mix of serious world-changing episodes and down-to-earth goof-offs, sometimes completely literally. Exhibit A, it isn't the main thing about you. It's just a really fun, bog-standard Bad Hair Day episode featuring the only voice actor on the cast who can make you hear the facial expression she's selling in the episode. I still don't like that Sakura has been reduced to being an as-needed plot character, and the actual problem portion of the episode takes far too long to get going, but hey, it's what's on the inside that counts. 50, Campfire Tales. I'd be a fan of this one even if it wasn't tethered directly to the Season 7 arc about the 6 pillars. That's how much I love anthologies. Grab your sisters, set up Mortal Danger, and sit around and tell stories. Ugh, put it in my veins. It was also a good move for the season not to give all 6 pillars their own episode like Season 4, and if you think you were going to put the less fleshed out ideas away in a display case, this was absolutely the way to do it. It also has a really cool rewatch bonus when you find out that this seemingly throwaway episode had surprise significance to the rest of the season, especially when Rarity's story is worth the cost of admission on its own. Based solely on the cold open of Rainbow Falls, you might be forgiven for thinking that Bulk Biceps is the funniest character on the entire show. The man has literally unbridled enthusiasm, and I want nothing more for him than to realize everything he sets out to do in his life. No matter how much trouble you have acclimating to a plot-important Rainbow Dash episode, he and Shy are here filling in the cracks with as many bunnies and as much whey protein as they can possibly muster. The episode itself is another one of those sitcom entries that gets by off the positive energy at the top and at the bottom by another absolutely stellar call-out post by Dash of the person she admires more than anyone. It's also the reaffirmation of these shimmer moments, where the girls each have a come to Celestia moment about their behavior that recontextualizes something about themselves. Those are the strongest elements of those key episodes, and there are still 2 more of these. 48 Simple Ways. Maybe it's the side effect of my endless adoration of the Freaky Friday and trading places tropes in fiction, but I absolutely adore it when characters in shows get one isolated episode to act out of character, either intentionally or against their will. Granted, I can see how some people might find both AJ and Rarity unusually petty in this episode, because it's not a great look for either of them, but I'll get to that in a second. I just have to make my once-a-season stop-off to praise Tabitha St. Germain for launching her entire being into a country accent so obnoxiously fake that it could break mirrors. The main source of contention here is that one of the core cast members actually has a crush on someone in what I think is the only instance of this in the entire series. I did an entire episode earlier this year about the lovey-dovey rule, why Lauren Faust instigated this no romance rule and what it means for the show going forward. But in terms of numbers, I think a single instance in over 200 episodes is still pretty good, and enough of an excuse for Rarity to go on her one allotted Helga Pataki run. I'll have to consult a pony historian, but I'm pretty sure that among all generations, the concept of the cutie mark and its significance as a rite of passage among ponies is the single most enduring and iconic piece of mythology in the franchise. Yes, it was likely just a way to make each of these marketable horse characters unique so that kids could grow an attachment, and they were only called symbols until Gen 3, but part of Lauren's pitch bible to Hasbro included this thoroughly fleshed out mythos that we learned about in Season 1. And this added canon and its philosophical implications, beginning with Friendship is Magic, is the source of some of my favorite episodes. Enter Marks and Recreation, featuring Rumble the Scrapper Pegasi, who has a nasty habit of putting words in the Crusaders' mouths. It's really important in episodes like this that are critical of the show's own mythos that a character like Rumble comes off as more of a frustrated kid than a snarky bad faith movie critic trying to poke holes in something you enjoy. Even the Crusaders make sure to set him straight when he starts crying out about fate and determinism.
You don't get a cutie mark just because you're good at something, or even because you like it. There's more to it than that.
Cutie marks are a gift, not an obligation. And in the pursuit of a life not determined by some magical icon on your flank, even the other campers eventually get bored trying to tempt fate and go back to trying to live their own lives. At times, Rumble has the makings of a Diet Starlight, toned back and placed in the framework of an existential crisis instead of that other context we'll get into. But after a really nice song, you do get to meet his older brother Thunderlane and a nice bit of world building that helps the kid understand that just because you like something doesn't mean it has to have anything to do with your cutie mark. I mean, do you know how often I have to justify why Shuffle's cutie mark is a camera battery? It's a hassle. 46, She Talks to Angel. Let's check all of Johnny's bias boxes. Fluttershy episode, Freaky Friday, baiting the audience with possible romantic attraction.
I talk to animals, I want to marry Discord.
Your list is over there.
Check, check, and check. But aside from trying to justify why Angel has been a colossal the entire series, the main attraction here is Andrea Libman, who extends her already tremendous range by having to not only voice 2 different characters with an established relationship, but also let us get to know Angel through Fluttershy without the aid of that cartoon body swap shorthand trick where their voices swap so you know who's who. Andrea pulls amazing double duty by maintaining that really soft timbre to her voice while picking up the pace to match the chaotic energy that a bunny would talk with. It's so impressive that I can ignore the fact that they brought Zecora back as a plot device again instead of letting us get to know her cute little lizard friend. There are 2 things that All Bottled Up does that, while not unique in terms of television storytelling, are nearly unheard of in the space of this series. And weirdly, the more interesting of the 2 is a structure decision. This is one of only 2, maybe 3 episodes in the entire series that have a defined A plot and B plot. A lot of modern sitcoms do this, where they create smaller plots with different combinations of characters and then fit them together later. Friendship is Magic, for the most part, sticks with the same story for the length of the episode, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I really respect that the writers understood that stretching either of these stories to fill an entire episode was not going to do it any favors. The A plot with Starlight and Trixie also pulls off one of my favorite storytelling tropes with this bottle that Glimmer uses to carry all her stank in. I'm in love with episodes that use fantastical elements to tell a story that's grounded in real interpersonal relationships. It's something that Rick and Morty did all the time in its first 3 seasons. seasons. Here she's literally bottling up her emotions, and it comes out in a really elegant way amidst all this rage spell nonsense. I can even forgive the fact that they had to dial up Trixie's denseness to 12 or 13 to get the point across, if only because the reason you stink speech at the end is this time grounded in reality and comes from a place of real worrying uncertainty. Scootaloo is probably my favorite disability-coded character in all of fiction. She's a great character with a ton of heart that focuses more on how she overcomes her limitations than the circumstances surrounding her own disability. What's really interesting is the fact that Flight to the Finish is one of only 2 episodes that deliver characterization as a result of her disability, and both of them avoid the trappings of being the bog-standard disability awareness episode. It's even got this trapdoor structure to it, where you don't realize until you catch up with her post-school bully mind games that this desire to knock it out of the park carries a different sort of weight for her. The whole thing hits this really emotional moment of resonance where the music swells and she gets a couple really cathartic seconds of hang time. The point of no return on its surface is to provide an exercise in Twilight Sparkle letting go. And to the episode's credit, that's exactly what it does. But this episode goes above and beyond, somewhere between the library's basement and the retirement home fruit fight. What begins as a desperate attempt to maintain her perfect record becomes something different as she becomes more concerned with the fact that she may have gotten her favorite librarian fired. It's a growth that's internally motivated, so when she finally gets confirmation on these changing feelings from a trusted source, it feels earned instead of just like late game character growth. Not a lot of shows make it to 100 episodes, and even fewer make it to 200, so it's only natural to do something really special at milestones like this. Sparkle 7 is a giant thank you to the 5 voice actors who kept the show alive for the last decade. Tara Strong, Andrea Libman, Ashley Ball, Tabitha St. Germain, and Kathy Westlock were all asked over Skype what kinds of stories they wanted their characters to experience, and stitched together an episode funnier and sweeter than it has any right being. What results is a patchwork of greatest hits from episodes you knew in your heart were always going to happen. Applejack gets to relive her history as a country music star, Pinky goes to space, and you get a few more welcome cameos from fan favorites like Maud and Zephyr Breeze. It's honestly a wonder that an episode with 5 writers came together this cleanly, let alone with this amount of heart. I always like it when kids are written like actual kids. Kids swear, get into fights, but also find new things and drop all previous interests to devote their entire life to that new thing. I 100% believe that the Washouts are a group that would actually exist in Equestria, and especially that it would be run by Lightning Dust, making a surprise second appearance as a tertiary villain that fits perfectly as the Johnny Knoxville ringleader to her own band of misfits. Stunt shows like the Washouts work because there's always this sense of possible danger. We don't find out until the end whether their show is reckless endangerment or calculated pageantry. We don't get a clear read on whether Scoot's new obsession is a case of next cool thing or something bigger. We don't even know if Dash cares about Scootaloo's safety at first, because Limelight has been her favorite flavor for 8 seasons now. This really delicate balancing act is propped up nicely by restrained performances from the rest of the cast, who could not be making it more clear that they have no dog in this fight. The worst sin that Sounds of Silence commits is releasing with 30 episodes to go in the series. How was the team supposed to know that they were going to reach into thin air and pull out a beautiful and culturally rich magical species that was instantly beloved by basically everyone? I'm not being sarcastic, the entire concept of the Kirin is amazing. It's paced and almost shot like an episode of The Twilight Zone, with long, extended moments of near silence as the girls figure out what's going on. Maybe too long. The charades bit starts to wane on me, and it hits a frustrating wall that I always forget about when I'm remembering this episode fondly. At least when they run into the main character though, they knocked it out of the park. Rachel Bloom brings the energy and charisma that made her famous on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend and channels it into the instantly likable Autumn Blaze, a character with a big heart and a bigger mouth. This is the show's cheeky excuse to squeeze in a few more pop culture jokes than normal, and Rachel pulls it off with a quirky flippancy that I admire. It's also the only episode to snap cut on action with this hoof bump at the end, which really punctuates the ride you just went on, and is something I wish they did more of in the series. 39, Made in Manhattan. Applejack and Rarity learn about the power of community service. This might not be the absolute funniest episode ever, but the whole trip really effectively sells the subtlety of a community that wants to improve their town, but doesn't know how or think they can be of any help. It's something of a soft spot to me as a theater kid, and it results in a really thoughtful and heartwarming AJ Rarity episode. Okay, here we go. After a season-long absence, Starlight Glimmer and her Diet Poison Ivy demeanor threatened to launch her into the pantheon of villains who mean serious business in this show. The cutie remark shows that she's smart, she's conniving, and she's well-researched enough to know the one linchpin in space-time that would cause Twilight's entire world to completely fall apart. Time travel is a storytelling mechanic that has to be used with the utmost caution, and the world building here makes it pretty clear that time travel is an extremely high-level magic that we shouldn't get used to seeing. Nor should we get used to seeing these really wild, dystopic what-if scenarios that allow the team to really experiment with character design. Starlight's also a really scary villain in that she knows exactly how to use the hero's words out of context as she tries to cancel the sonic rainboom that made them all friends in the first place. This episode could have shot right up into the top 10, but with 10 minutes to go, the pacing runs right into a wall, and if you've been watching enough of this video, you know exactly which wall I'm talking about. I want to make it incredibly clear that I think this is a good motivation for all of the evil she perpetuated in the season premiere. Maybe a bit of an overreaction, but I at least get where she's coming from. The biggest problem is that it needed time the episode just didn't have. Losing your best friend to magic you don't understand and can't control is a scary thing, which is why I wish we had like 5 extra minutes tops to explore it a little more thoroughly. This episode has fantastic energy and a breakneck pace, but it slams to a complete stop to focus on equally interesting character drama and backstory. Maybe they could have swapped out one of the bad futures for more time, but I still think it wouldn't have been enough, and that's a shame. The season 6 opener would try to remedy this by giving the childhood friends more time to connect, but here the writer's appetite is overshadowed by the size of the plate they had to work with. I can see why the team likes to go back to these Luna-driven plots. On top of being totally rad, she's got this wise, been-around-the-block attitude to her that can allow for nice mentor episodes, or in rarer cases, some really brutal characterization. Do Princess's Dream of Magic Sheep has this emotional self-flagellation that's rooted enough in her past transgressions that it doesn't come across as look-at-me edgy. I ran across one fan who really hates this episode because it portrays depression in a really insensitive way, and I can respect a fellow fan that wants mental health to be portrayed genuinely in fiction, but I think that what Luna's experiencing here is more in line with feelings of guilt, which can be related. But while depression can manifest itself often without any perceived cause or source, Luna's struggling with the hurt she caused as Nightmare Moon, and it's a toxic feeling to shake, especially when you consider how long she must have been dealing with this while everyone else slept every night. That's a burden that I think was pretty well expressed, and it's very sweet that she had the girls there to help her. The Tantibus itself is awesome looking, and it moves exactly like you would expect the Spectre of Guilt to move. Dream hopping plots are always fun, and the show plays with this by offering these fan-indulgent moments like Flutterbat, the Power Ponies, Giant Derpy, and this full-on transformation sequence for Big Mac. It really feels like they left all their cards on the table, which is really awesome when coupled with the emotional resonance as strong as more grounded episodes like Amending Fences. Luna's in a ton of good episodes. She previously took command of the spookiest night of the year and one of the only 2 Halloween episodes to tell you that it's cool to be scary. Luna Eclipsed is a notoriously popular episode among Luna fans, but it's also just a really good episode on its own. Most Halloween episodes have this air of family-safe spookiness to them, while still being able to be dumb and silly, like with Chicken Pot Pie or A Dragon Dressed Like a Dragon. The slapstick is also really good, and the whole episode is a high watermark for the show's insistence on not judging someone based on their appearance. After the flubbed character introduction from Dragonshy that we talked about over an hour and a half ago, the show finally shows us how to do a character intro properly. Suited for Success was the first in a long line of very, very good standalone rarity episodes. This episode spawned at least one evergreen meme, and the transformation sequence at the end is worth the price of admission alone. Over the course of this series, you catch these clues that Rainbow Dash has this really well-hidden fear of failure, or being seen as inadequate. Episodes like Fame and Misfortune, The Mysterious Mare Do Well, Newbie Dash, and Tanks for the Memories. It's buried pretty deep in there, but when they come up, I'm reminded that Dash is a pony with worries and fears like everyone else, and I live for these moments. Dash is the only member of the main 6 that I see actual hate for on a consistent basis, and it's episodes like this one that keep me from being one of those people. Testing 1, 2, 3 has these moments of Dash in despair, of worried Dash, heck, even just Dash goofing off. Some texture to cover up this facade of confidence that tackles every problem in exactly the same way. It's clear to me that of the main 6, Dash has the hardest time understanding that everyone is different. Everyone has different interests, everyone deals with stress a different way, and everyone learns differently. And that doesn't mean that you're dumb or a bad person for it. So maybe the goofy ways that the girls come up with to help Dash learn the history of the Wonderbolts are only tangentially rooted in the science of learning, learning, and some of them feel like a stretch to get them included in the discussion, but I feel this is one of the more important lessons the show ever taught, because I've been there. I was Rainbow Dash. And what happens between Twilight and Dash during their short flight in Act 3 is nothing short of a magic trick. The last time we went to Appaloosa, we got the whole gang together. We had a great time with a concrete goal, met a fun side character, and had a lot of good laughs along the way. Then the first act break happened, and the story shot itself in the foot. I'll never understand why they did that, but one season later, the show is older and wiser and has a clear goal in mind. The last roundup is a cohesive little knot to untie from start to finish, and even if you don't like the resolution at the end of that rope, you're digging through some really fun world building, mystery solving, coach chasing, and a really inspired take on the chocolate conveyor belt scene from I Love Lucy. And in a cool take from Reddit user Chaucer345, this is one of the few episodes to deal firsthand with Applejack's very subtle self-esteem issues that would skim above the surface for the rest of the series, either from being left behind by a friend, unable to care for her family, or even just being unable to admit she was wrong. You never see that much of it because AJ's just the most stubborn pony there ever was, so it's nice to see that side of her dealt with, if only just once. 32, One Bad Apple. When a kid's show premieres, give it long enough and you'll eventually arrive at the bullying episode. It just so happens that when early series MLP episodes were being produced, there were several long-term studies coming out about the prolonged psychological effects of bullying, and the team chose to go after this anti-bullying stance pretty hard. Babseed comes to visit her cousin and finds more in common with Tiara and Silver Spoon than anyone else. A lot of people seem to find the revelation at the end that Babs was bullied at her school and therefore is a bully here really cheap justification, and I disagree. I think that when she came across the girls getting bullied by these new kids, she saw a traumatic situation she wanted no part in and decided to take the side that wouldn't get stomped on, even though you can still see her cover up her blank flank when they do the stupid little sugar lump dance. It's not uncommon for victims of bullying to become bullies themselves, and it's that cycle of powerlessness that I see at play here. 31, Tanks for the Memories. Dealing with the death of a pet or a loved one in general is never a fun experience. It's something that everyone has to go through, and you're never in a good place when you grieve. Everyone does it differently, and I won't criticize someone for how they deal with loss. Rainbow Dash? Honestly, pretty textbook. Strip away the industrial sabotage and the absolute banger of a rock tune, and this is pretty clear representation of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model of the 5 stages of grief. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and a really quiet moment of acceptance that's rare to see, let alone from Rocket Horse. When it's sweet, it's completely earned, but when it's messy, it's a little hard to watch, and I think that's by design. We're never our best self in Stage 4, and that goes for ponies just like everyone else, but I think that sort of honesty of character was for the best. Magic Duel is a rad episode. There's a lot of high-level, borderline scary magic going on, capped off by a really satisfying twist ending, but it also operates as a simultaneous thesis statement for a fan-favorite character. Trixie returns following her really wobbly debut in Ghostbusters. Luckily for the team, I don't think they completely grasped the power that they were wielding by having Trixie voiced by the great and powerful Kathleen Barr, another phenomenal VA who would also lend shades of her performance to Queen Chrysalis down the road. I think that as they were prepping storylines for seasons 2 and 3, someone realized what a missed opportunity they had and brought her back to dial the vindictiveness all the way up. Trixie is one of those secondary villains like Wheatley or Beelzemon who don't pose much of a threat until they're given all the power they could ever want and turn into complete monsters. Kathleen sells that entire character arc so well, and she cements her position in my top 5 VAs of this series 100%. One of the sharpest character design choices the show ever pulled was designing the antithesis to the element of honesty as a pair of sleazy carnival barkers. The super speedy Cider Squeezy 6000 may be a more fun episode of the Apple family protecting their livelihood that does basically everything an episode can do right, but by the time we arrive at Leap of Faith, the brothers know where she lives, literally and metaphorically. They know that there are people out there like Granny Smith who long to regain their lost youth despite whatever accidentally demotivational poster from the network would have you believe. They also believe in the placebo effect, a physiological phenomenon where your body is essentially lied to about what's been put in it. In one of the coldest scenes in the series, Applejack confronts Flim and Flam, who are confident enough that Applejack will get held back by her one-size-fits-all sense of honesty and integrity that they are literally squeezing apples in front of her. That's what a good key episode is supposed to do, to get people and ponies to think critically about the elements of harmony and their uses in more broad and complex context than just passing a polygraph test. Under what circumstances is it okay to omit the truth or bend a small white lie on a technicality if it creates a better outcome in the long run? Thematically, the episode drills this home in a really satisfying way that I love to see more of. 28. The Times They Are a Changeling. Spike casually swoops in and drops his best episode in the middle of season 6. By this point, Spike has been known for half the series for his brave and glorious his qualities, a shtick he puts to the test when he tries to befriend an ostracized changeling, literally starving from lack of love. This sort of desperation leads to some really bigoted antagonism from the others, which is especially powerful coming from characters like Shining Armor, who we've known for the better part of 4 years now. Spike's response song is genuinely good and turns his brave and glorious shtick on its head. It's a really elegant subversion, and it does wonders for the season as a whole. Mystery on the Friendship Express is an episode that feels like a rare hybrid of the character-driven fun of earlier series episodes and the higher energy silliness and character design of late series episodes. On our way to the season finale, Pinky and Twilight team up Sherlock style to solve a low-stakes sugar-related mystery, and the episode never lets up. I love Pinky and her hat this episode, and the rest of the cast gets their licks in too. It's an amazingly fun episode with a lot of creative ideas and an outrageous series of puns right at the end that makes me feel like this entire episode was reverse engineered just for them. I think it's important that a show this positive coming to an end understands what it's competing against. The real world is a place where people don't always have each other's best interests in mind and can succumb to really hateful ideas and beliefs that serve no real purpose. This show demonstrates what we can be, but the ending of the end let us go with a warning about the dangers of what we can become. It was acknowledged before by the big bad triumvirate just how easy it was to turn ponies against one another, but this close to the end, the show changes to using much more deliberate coded language.
It was the strangest thing. He kept calling me Earth Pony, like I didn't have a name, and watching me like he thought I'd steal the silver.
That's a very conscious choice that I'm glad the show chose to include amongst all the wild fight scenes scattered over the episode, which is not to say the stakes here weren't raised significantly. There were times I was seriously worried a cast member was going to actually eat it. It's a really satisfying final confrontation, so why is it outside the top 25?
You wanted to boost Twilight's confidence, so you brought back Chrysalis, Cozy Glow, and T-Rex to attack her?
Some of the worst things imaginable have been done with the best intentions. I have tried for the last 2 years to justify this unreveal to myself any way I know how, but it's just not clicking. Oh, but you did such a good job defeating Sombra. Remember the fist bumps? There is an uninterrupted 3-minute sequence in this episode of nothing but the entire cast yelling at Discord for the bed. And everything he offers is after the fact, without touching on the fact that this time he literally can't unring the bell, and everyone in the room rightfully jumps down his throat. If only his extremely talented VA would show just a little bit of humility like he was clearly capable of when he the bed back in season 4. That was such genuine regret that I still feel bad for the guy despite his lapse in judgment. That kind of self-reflection is possible. Also, finding out all of your previous successes were fake has got to be some kind of legitimate hell, and one of the absolute worst things you can do to a person about to take on the biggest challenge of her life. Discord makes an uneven attempt at being repentant, but at this point I don't really care, so we put it on the back burner to eventually get forgotten about while we deal with the way more important fallout. It's a great finale in spite of that last paragraph, not because of it. For my bits, there is not a single episode of Friendship is Magic that is doing more plot-heavy lifting on both a micro and a macro level than the one about the silly little tap dance horse. On Your Marks operates as a part of the narrative whole of the show on 3 separate levels simultaneously. On a micro level, the show provides a self-contained story with a problem to solve at the end. On a character level, it allows Applebloom to grapple with a larger feeling of loneliness and a lack of purpose as Scoots and Sweetie Belle develop other interests and what that means for her life goals in the long term. And on the macro level, it manages to address the elephant in the room of just what the heck the girls are supposed to do now that they have cutie marks. This is one of those episodes that gets lost in the slowly declining fandom hype of the second half of the series, which ironically made it one of the biggest surprises of my rewatch. Out on My Own hits like a truck when it's not in your normal playlist rotation with certified bops like Smile or Babsy. It's been amazing to see how far Michelle Kreber's singing voice has developed between the ages of 11 and 17. Desperate to recapture that lost sense of connection, Applebloom wanders into a Ponyville dance studio where she meets a shy, hot-footed foal named Tendertaps, who helps Applebloom understand what it means to be her own mare, and her newly branched out friends help her understand that being in the limelight isn't so bad. Occasionally during the course of the show's run, a public figure will reference Friendship is Magic in some way, only for the pony's sphere of influence to suck them up and add them to the show's canon. It happened to Felicia Day, Lena Hall, William Shatner, Patton Oswalt, and the clear most celebrated guest star in the show's tenure, Weird Al Yankovic. The cheese sandwich we get in Pinky Pride is just that kid in school that said your joke louder and got all the credit. That's to be expected from a party pony, but the other girls just sort of get swept up in it, which is kinda scummy. But then you get to learn about Pinky. Songs like Pinky the Party Planner echo character songs like Smile from before, but with songs like Pinky's Lament, you really get to understand how important silly comic relief is to her. It would be easy to be utilitarian and say that society needs doctors, builders, mailmen, etc. Not so much with party planners. This is a really rare moment moment of understanding just how much care goes into being so carefree, and Pinky's lament is that moment. Everything from the downbeat minor chords to the lilting melancholy into the bridge, and this really touching stairway to the next verse where she's reminded of all the joy she's brought her friends over the years. And then, you know,
Show them a time of their lives like they've never known. Like they've never known.
amidst all the balls to the wall party Sakuga, it's moments like these when a 9 out of 10 episode starts flirting with greatness, and the fact that we still have 24 episodes on this list makes my heart really happy. You already know I love anthologies, and the Cutie Mark Chronicles is no different. The Crusaders go looking for Cutie Mark advice, and in exchange we get fun little backstories on the callings of the ponies we've grown attached to over the season. Applejack has a really sweet homesick moment, Rarity gets ragdolled halfway across Equestria, and Pinky thinks so hard that her transition effect breaks. It also sets up this really cool serendipitous connective tissue that links the girls together long before they even meet each other. It's an idea that served as the linchpin for the season 5 finale from earlier, so this wasn't just a fun throwaway. Stranger Than Fanfiction is responsible for my all-time favorite MLP viewing experience. Rainbow Dash goes to a Daring Do convention, ecstatic about the celebration of one of her favorite things when she meets Patton Oswalt's character Quibblepants, an eccentric Daring Do nerd with fan knowledge to rival her own. They start geeking out together over a recreation of the tiled floor from that Imagine spot way back when Dash fell in love with Daring Do in the hospital. Dash points out,
They even put the tiles in the right order.
Good catch.
"What a crazy attention to detail," I shout to myself, excitedly pausing the episode to go open up season 2 so I could admire the attention to detail. But wait, those aren't in the right order at all. They call themselves fans? Then the trap springs. I'm one of those picky nerds now. I'm sure it was unintentional, but this episode actually ratioed me for being a nerd who cares enough about inconsequential details that I stopped what I was doing to go check. And it's that sort of meta self-examination that puts this episode up there with the rest of my favorites. The whole episode is about respecting other people for choosing to like something in a different way than you do, be it by staying home and enjoying your favorite book series, or by engaging in cute kitsch stuff like foam pits and edutainment adventures. Even Quibble is too cynical to recognize actual danger, and that leads to a long series of gags in the third act that teeter right on that cynical sweet spot without falling over the edge. Normally when the show wants to instill character values, they have to putt with a handicap since the show is for children. Not so with Top Bolt. Twilight and Rainbow Dash are sent to iron out the unseen folds in the relationship between two Wonderbolt Academy students, and true to Cutie Map form, both of them approach the problem with equally valid methods instead of comically getting in each other's way. This episode shines because even though Skystinger is a jerky showboat and Vapor Trail is a pushover, they get extended family sequences to really help color in how they react to attention as an only child and a runt of the litter. Sometimes the hardest thing is telling your friends the truth, and there's a really vulnerable scene where Sky says some really rude things that come from a place of anger and resentment. It's a shockingly mature episode because these characters are allowed to get embarrassed or afraid in a way that everyone seems to understand, and that's what makes this episode a standout. Twilight and Dash also operate as great comedic foils to one another, and both bring their own personal strengths to what is easily the most complex map episode. There's nothing I can say that hasn't already been said about the instant classic that is the super speedy Cider Squeezy 6000. It's an intense spectacle of an episode featuring two smooth-talking con men operating as the spiritual antithesis to everything the Apple family stands for, and a good old-fashioned competition on which they literally bet the family farm. It's a tale as old as time between the mom and pop shop and the spirit of capitalism, and Applejack's entire family, blood and honorary, come together for the most satisfying non-lesson about not taking shortcuts. 19. Daring Done. Daring Do is retiring as a result of a smear campaign led by a mysterious rival. Pinky and Rainbow Dash have to clear her name and convince her not to retire while managing to elegantly fit in another backstory behind a pillar of Equestria. I like here that the episode tackles the real ramifications of collateral damage in superhero movies without playing them for laughs. I mean, of course Dr. Cavalleron is going to look out for his own, but the people of Somnambula have every right to be upset about the state of their town, especially when your character is an homage to a notoriously charismatic professor of archaeology with a history of stealing artifacts from the people of other cultures. We get a really cool art shift as we learn about the namesake of Somnambula, literally sleepwalker Walker, who brought hope to the village by defeating the Sphinx, her riddle, and her Temple Minute to Win It challenge. Pinky Dash episodes like this one provide two characters that interact really well to help the story flow better, and that narrative smoothness is felt all over the entire episode. In October of 2018, fans were treated to a little extra Christmas cheer right on top of the Halloween season. My Little Pony Best Gift Ever is a double-length Christmas episode about the core cast playing Secret Santa with each other. Aside from some of the cast trying to game the system, it's a lovely time of year, full of callbacks, stank eyes, and the absolute cutest winter outfits you have ever seen. And pudding. Harbinger says pudding. The entire special effortlessly cuts back and forth between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different stories, and has all those story trains collide together at the end in a really satisfying way. Rarity has a disarmingly cute encounter with a young fashion fan, and Twilight has a bit of a moment with a particular dessert option. The song at the end comes from a really tender place, even if you're turned off by the Rarity Spike dynamic, and the Christmas theming sweeps all the failed gifts under the rug anyway. Hey, we haven't talked about Big Mac in almost 40 minutes. The guy works too hard, he needs a win. Hard to Say Anything is one of those episodes I have to try a little harder to defend against fans, given the kind of tart, on-the-nose boy band performance by everyone's favorite sandbar, Vincent Tong. That song in the second act is one of the funniest songs in the series, and it's not like Featherbangs is outright evil or even out to get your girl. He just excels in ways that Mac has never felt comfortable with, and it's up to the Crusaders to help him get the girl, voiced with an adorable Jennifer Tilly softness by Rebecca Choiquette. We get to know her pretty quick, since she was a key player in the absolute darkest episode of the series, but the two of them hit it off in a way that makes me completely forget about Cheera Lee. Don't tell her I said that. There's this concept in writing that I want to talk about called purity of metaphor. I first heard it used in an interview by Rick and Morty showrunner Dan Harmon, where he discussed how Rick turning himself into a pickle to avoid going to family therapy was a metaphor for Rick's alcoholism, even though there weren't any overt references to that anywhere in the episode. The shorthand of it is basically explaining the joke, that discussing the elements of the storytelling device would bring down the elegance of the metaphor. The underlying metaphor of surf and/or turf is so strong that I don't even have to outright explain the significance of two hippogriffs choosing to live in different locations with the aid of a magical pearl that changes their physical form, leaving their son confused about where he wants to grow up. You just get it. Terramar, whose name I realized embarrassingly late is a play on land and sea, is voiced with a wonderful plucky charm by Cole Howard, who was terrific when I met him at Ciderfest in 2021. It helps that a young kid's problem is being solved by other young kids, because it keeps anyone from being talked down to, and it leads to some interesting conflict that brushes up against some of Scootaloo's more sensitive areas. We also get a really cool song with some aquatic sounding instrumentation, some great puns, and this wild 9-tuple-A rhyme scheme from Sweetie Belle.
You dare to compare anywhere to there is unfair and just plain wrong.
It's been a ride, and I want to thank you for putting up with me, but we're finally here, the best Discord episode. Discordant Harmony is the extremely rare and refreshing episode that has the gall to let Discord be the only character we focus on for half of the runtime. Discord gets a long sequence that operates off of on-brand sight gags where he manages to quite literally talk himself into a nagging anxiety that the very essence of who he is might one day scare away the one person in the world that means more to him than anyone else. I've since gotten over my distaste for this pairing, given how weirdly protective I can get of Best Horse, but you can imagine my original extreme confusion when I watched the season 6 finale out of context and find out that they're together for some reason. This episode weaponizes that confusion and turns Discord into something I didn't think was possible, a relatable character with goals and worries like everyone else. We get treated to an extended scene where Discord sweeps his entire personality under the rug to become John DeFancy, an aggressively reserved, non-threatening version of himself that he thinks Fluttershy would approve of. Of course, she's already at the finish line of this character arc, but it's so cute getting to see her excited about what kind of crazy tea party he'd throw her, and even cuter when she tries to bring her friend back from the ether by committing every act of G-rated comic mischief she can think of. Speaking of which, this episode pulls off more of that awesome grounded fantasy I talked about with All Bottled Up, where this rejection of who he is accompanies him losing his magic and Marty McFlying out of existence. I love it when magical fiction does this, and it's so good here. From what I've heard, A Canterlot Wedding was pretty much the peak of mainstream My Little Pony hype. Twilight's got a brother we've never heard of before, and he's getting married to her old foal sitter, whom we've also never met. met. And honestly, the fact that we've never met these characters is the only reason this kind of plot is allowed to work at all. Shining Armor is voiced with a charming, preppy swagger by Andrew Francis, who caused some people to have a confusing awakening moment when he would eventually voice Twilight's love interest, Flash Sentry, at Canterlot High. The episode also introduces Queen Chrysalis, voiced by Kathleen Barr, who chose a register a little too close to Trixie for my liking. Otherwise, she's got all the makings of a fantastic villain, including the ability to fit an actual aria into her villain showcase. If there's one thing that holds this episode back, it's the rest of the bridal party dunking on Twilight for not blindly accepting the behavior of the characters she should know better than anyone. You'd think they'd know to trust a close family member, but hey, love's in bloom, I guess. Season 7 turns the season finale juices on full blast for a lore-induced final battle whose main fault is an absolutely massive exposition dump that goes on so long that the other characters complain about it in-universe. In what would turn out to be the most impressive casting feat in the show's history, all 6 of these new historical figures were given voice by established, talented voice actors who had never been on the show before. No funky inflections or sneaking in Tabitha St. Germain. We have actual celebrated stage actors here to voice the elements of hope, strength, beauty, bravery, healing, and Light Yagami's dad. Elements which do a phenomenal job of being ancient analogs to the elements of harmony without being direct thesaurus clones of one another. Part 1 is mainly a series of fetch quests, which might turn some people off, but I love these quick little one-off encounters that remind us that the girls kept up the elements just fine, and that's very sweet. Part 2 brings these characters back to the present and examines Ponykind's evolving relationship with evil in the modern age. It's a cool bit of philosophical waxing that brings a lot of depth that I wasn't expecting out of this pony show. The breakup misunderstanding is such a tired trope at this point. Big Mac overhears snippets of a conversation with Sugar Belle and is convinced that she's going to break up with him. It's old hat. So why am I talking about the breakup breakdown in the 12 slot? Because by the grace of Celestia, they finally found a place to put Discord that allows him to shine instead of a place that allows him to do the least damage to the episode he's in. While Big Mac deals with his life falling apart, Spike the Romantic and Discord the Cynic are having an actual ideological argument about whether true love actually exists. It's a central theme that runs through the entire episode, including an adorable B-plot about the Crusaders trying to find Sweetie Belle's secret admirer. The whole thing is made up of sitcom-level gags, but it gets played with such genuine earnestness from everyone involved that you buy it completely.
Who do you think broke Sugar Belle's wagon wheel?
11. The Saddle Row Review. This is a quick one because the entire episode feels like it was sent through a dozen script passes with how tightly packed and highly polished everything is. Rarity's friends help her open her first shop in Canterlot and everything goes wrong all at once. That kind of story would be fine, but it's wrapped in this shiny, non-linear foil of all the girls providing talking heads interviews to Buried Lead, great name, for an interview on Rarity's opening day. It's lightning fast and full of callbacks and visual gags. Everything comes together and makes for a really satisfying episode that broke my heart not to be able to put in my top 10. Common Ground brings back a fan favorite guest star and uses him to tell a disarmingly real tale about meeting the love of your life and trying to make it work with her explicitly stated daughter from a previous relationship. That's extreme for this kind of show, and the episode pulls no punches about the fact that he has absolutely nothing in common with Clear Sky's daughter Windsprint. We get some goofy scenes of Quibble trying to get good, including an interesting failed attempt at using his encyclopedic knowledge of rule bending to earn his stepdaughter's favor. This is usually where plots like this would end, and the family member he wanted to bond with would say, "Wow, you used your weird skills to take an interest in my things." In an even more impressive writing decision, Windsprint just sort of cuts the knot and dunks on Quibble, who I know is trying his best, so it sucks to watch him struggle like this. But dang it if they don't eventually earn that happy ending, right at the end of a really emotionally mature episode that hits all the harder because it happened to an absolute schmuck with a ton of charisma. Magical Mystery Cure was originally going to serve as the series finale to a swift 65-episode order of what was originally supposed to be an advertisement for a toy brand. But after the episode locked, the show got picked up for the first of what would become 6 additional seasons. That longevity results in an odd third act that throttles its own pacing to resolve Twilight's arc as Celestia's student. But really, Twilight becoming an alicorn is something that never really bothered me beyond breaking up the symmetry of the cast being made up of 2 unicorns, 2 Pegasi, and 2 Earth ponies. What I want to focus on instead is less the cure and more the magical mystery. It's no secret that I adore body swaps. Having one character get to literally walk a mile in their shoes is a hokey ancient plot device, but it's so difficult to mess up. All characters involved end up with a renewed sense of respect for one another, and you get some cute bonding after all the body horror. Magical Mystery Cure doesn't just settle for good, though. It does something that makes it different from all other body swaps I've ever seen, and manages to ask some serious questions about the unique universe it inhabits. This unique angle that could only be done here makes it a really interesting take on the whole formula. It also lends a sense of existential existential dread of having your entire life path overturned. It's a really hopeless feeling that lends itself to a lot of powerlessness as the town falls into disarray. But then it clicks for Twilight that even if you don't believe in your power to do something, your friends do. Every one of these songs bops, but a true friend in particular hit me really hard at a time in my life when I felt lost and powerless in what I was doing. That song got me through it. It's got 5 unique verses that walk back this awkward 5 cycle the girls fell into, and it all clicks into place like the last few pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Each one of the girls rediscovers themselves with the help of the literal magic of friendship, and every time you get this really killer eyeball reboot effect. If the series had ended here, you wouldn't hear me complain ever again. 8. Twilight's Kingdom. We get the introduction of a Chrysalis tier villain in T-Rec, as well as the relapse of the previously reformed Discord, in a moment of weakness that I actually enjoy for how in character it is. Converting someone who has had a generations-long penchant for mischief doesn't stick after a single encounter, and I get that. What blows me away though is how amongst everything he's done and all the people he's hurt, Discord shows genuine grief and guilt about his actions. This sense of forgiveness is the closest you're ever gonna get to the thesis of the show. We get a high energy transformation sequence, and wow, that is gaudy. 586983. It's a fun bit of trivia that I haven't been able to verify, but the rumor mill says that part of the reason these Saiyan friendship forms never came back is because their toys didn't sell well, which, I mean, look at them. I'm not mad, it just seems like a bit of a goofy oversight to give them all the Lisa Frank treatment. I'm also more willing to forgive because it caps off this season with some absolutely phenomenal animated battle sequences. Like, wow, I had no idea that Flash animation was capable of half of this. Overall, it's a phenomenal high-energy ride from start to finish, and I am absolutely shocked that not one of the survey respondents chose this as their favorite episode. For a very long time when writing this script, I asked myself over and over again, am I ranking the best episodes or my favorite episodes? Until now, I wasn't sure. Philly Vanilli is my favorite episode of this show. Personal opinion isn't something that requires justification, but I've always found Fluttershy to be an intensely relatable character with the way she handles overcoming anxieties, and giving her a well-deserved win in this episode makes my heart do little pancake flips in my chest. An a cappella pony group is something that I totally believe exists, and it's an awesome new step for Daniel Ingram to construct such an awesome song that you hear throughout, from a genre that doesn't get a lot of representation. Kazumi Evans provides wonderful soaring vocals to the quartet, which permeate even after Shy joins the lineup thanks to the return of Poison Joke, voiced during songs by Marcus Mosley. It's during these little montages that the animators got to capture the silly, unbridled joy of singing when you think no one's watching. It leads to a few charmingly dumb moments, including this ridiculous scuba suit and my absolute favorite frame in the entire series. Eventually, Shy gets found out and retreats back to her cottage, where she confronts the realization that singing for yourself is completely harmless. What really drives this one home for me is that scene at the end. When the girls realize that she can now perform to sold-out crowds no problem, she pops that argument with a tiny little pin.
But for now, baby steps, every pony. Baby steps.
These kinds of anxieties don't get solved overnight, and that's absolutely okay. She took a big step here, and it's such a caring and genuine episode. To Where and Back Again is an out-of-this-world great episode, an absolutely stuffed buffet of foods that have no business tasting this good together. Starlight and Trixie return from an emotionally traumatizing visit to her old village to find everyone impersonated by changelings, so the two enlist the help of Discord and Thorax to dive headfirst into the changeling hive and rescue their friends.
Well, isn't this quite the combination of secondary characters?
Why does this work? All these side characters bounce off each other so well, and they all come prepared in their own way. It really does feel like you gave someone 4 MLP characters picked out of a hat and asked them to improv their way through a season finale. I could gush like this for the rest of the video, but I still have 5 episodes to get to, which shouldn't be possible while I'm still on this hype train, but I'll show you what I mean. Oftentimes, it's harder to look at your own faults and excuse who you used to be than it is to find fault in others. That's the core of Amending Fences, an episode less worried about being funny and more worried about being emotionally devastating. Way back in the pilot, Twilight had some nasty book-induced tunnel vision that led her to neglect the feelings of a lot of people around her. Twilight's friends are unusually okay with how standoffish she was as a filly, and it's a guilt that weighs on her, because despite the no hard feelings in the air, she feels a lot of remorse for a pony from the past that by all measurements no longer reflects her. Everybody struggles with past regrets, and it's a weird feeling to learn that you're a different, probably probably better person than you were 5 years ago. On the inside, it's something Twilight has had to deal with. And on the outside, she's got to deal with Moondancer, a scorned, reclusive bookworm and Twilight's foil in every way. We learn about how much courage it took her to be put in a position where she could be let down by the Princess of Friendship, and how long people can hold resentment over traumatic experience. The entire affair is upsetting to watch unfold because pilot Twilight doesn't just represent a betrayal to her friend Moondancer, but a betrayal of herself and who she is now. We don't want to be seen as villains, but sometimes we have to accept the fact that we've failed in the past, and that's okay. 4. The last problem. Not a lot of TV series can lay claim to a series finale that absolutely sticks the landing, but here we are. Years later, Twilight has taken over and has a pupil of her own with some familiar opinions about books being more important than experiences. In order to set her down the right path, we get one more story delivered in hindsight, with so much bittersweet sentimentality to it that you might for a moment believe that the ponies you've grown to know and love drifted apart after all these years. Then some weirdos start showing up.
Maybe we could get to places on time if you let me do some of the chores instead of always doing everything yourself.
Maybe I would if you did them the right way.
It's so gratifying to see all the girls achieving their happy ending, and even more gratifying that you've seen enough of this dumb pony show to legitimately want these characters to succeed. That's the sign of a show that's changed your life. The show didn't have to go out on arguably the best song in the series, but this is legitimately the best send-off this monstrous cast of characters could have asked for. And I'm forever grateful to the team that closed this wonderful show for making sure it all got tied up nicely. Welcome to the darkest year of our adventures yet, Twilight Sparkle. I adore the cutie map because it's so much tonally darker than the rest of the series. The episode is only number 3 because it's so much tonally darker than the rest of the series. The girls come across a dusty, unassuming village. Of course, it's not normal because that's a story for when the other shoe drops, but man, I had no idea. A lot of words have been used to refer to Starlight's hold on these ponies, and while it may take a couple of ideas from a few different ideologies, the word I hear thrown around the most is cult. This community, for lack of a better word, believes that removing any and all individual characteristics is the only way to achieve a truly peaceful society without envy or jealousy. And in this universe, that means your cutie mark, the very essence of who you are and what you were meant to do in this world. That's a couple orders of magnitude more horrifying than just dressing everyone the same, and it's exemplified by Our Town, this eerie faux march that threatens at every bar to spill out into an atonal mess. Pinky is suspicious from the start, but the fact that Fluttershy seems really receptive to the concept at first is a scary reminder of just how easily real-world organizations like this can entice vulnerable members of society. Then it all hits the fan at the episode break, and we wind up here. An actual rehabilitation room with the goal of sanding down all your unique properties so that you fit better. Literal brainwashing. It's the most evil the show has ever gone out of its way to portray, and by far the darkest episode of the entire series. And weirdly, that's why I like it so much. The writing team was willing to try a wildly different story that I cannot believe got past Hasbro's approval team, but the fact that they were willing to try shows how much they still care about trying to produce an interesting product. Starlight escapes, and you already know the rest, but for one brilliantly dark moment, I forgot what kind of show I was watching, and I adore that kind of desire to turn the show on its head. There are good episodes of a television show, and then there are good episodes of television in general. The perfect pair is basically there. Literally the only thing I knew about it going in was that it was universally beloved as something very special, and for 7 seasons I had no idea what that meant. I didn't read the synopsis, and I stayed far away from any and all spoilers. Then Applejack goes and ruins the whole mystery.
Brat, Mac, and Buttercup, those are our parents' names.
What a lovely ambush to play on a viewing public that expected nothing out of one of the most unspoken questions of the series. I didn't even catch on to the stunt casting of William Shatner and Felicia Day, both of whom give moving, understated performances. The whole event is a single compartmentalized backstory episode that erodes a cozy little cavern in your heart. There are subtle moments of insecurity from cast members we've known for a long time, and every last one of them is completely earned. More than any other episode, this makes Equestria feel like an interconnected world, and it makes me sob like no other episode has. It's truly special and stands as one of the best single episodes of television I've ever watched. If you're still here, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching this. This video took over 2 years to make, and I'm beyond excited that you took a moment to check out this self-indulgent monster of an episode. The number 1 slot starts in 10 seconds. It's not a surprising pick, but if you enjoy this show as much as I do, consider leaving a like or a comment and let me know which episodes meant something to you. Anyway. Who prays for the devil? Who in 109 episodes has had the common humanity to pray for the one jerk that needed it most? Our one fellow in Philly who most needed a friend. Crusaders of the Lost Mark is maybe the least surprising way to end a list like this. The Perfect Pair is a perfect standalone episode, but this is a celebration, a culmination of 5 seasons of character growth casually dropped near the dead middle of the series where no one would think to look. This is the culmination of 3 little girls working to better themselves, and eventually each other, in the only way they know how. Of all the leftover artifacts from Season 1, Diamond Tiara is the absolute last person whose imperfections I thought you could chisel away into meaningful growth in a single episode. From this constant fear of failure to the overbearing parents who stand in the middle of the street like it's an anime opening. From the student president story that could have stood on its own to an amazingly well-orchestrated chase song through the streets of Ponyville. From the most emotionally resonant turnaround of any character in the series, to the older girls telling them they're proud of their sisters. This episode is something that even viewers in the heyday of the fandom knew had to happen eventually. A goal for these girls that always felt like it was some nebulous distance in the future, not something you'd think you'd be fortunate enough to witness. For just a moment, everyone was on Team Crusader, and as they line up at the end of it all to take that photo that feels at once new and familiar, you realize you're more invested in this silly kids show than you ever thought you would be. This episode confirmed for me that I'm really part of this community, and there's nothing more special to me than 3 girls who finally realized that themselves.
Yeah, I can